Something about the ancient world doesn't make sense, and the problem isn't a lack of evidence, but too much of it. Across different times and places, the same patterns keep appearing. Precision that shouldn't exist, knowledge that arrives too early, and structures that follow rules we no longer understand. This isn't about isolated mysteries anymore. It's about a pattern that refuses to go away. The real question is simple but uncomfortable. How did ancient civilizations achieve results that seem to exceed the limits of their time? Because once you start examining the evidence, it becomes clear this isn't just history. It's a problem we haven't solved yet. Perched on a limestone ridge overlooking the Cahal River Valley in western Belize, Cahal Pech stands as one of the earliest known Maya settlements, with origins stretching back to approximately 1,200 years before the Common Era, long before the rise of the great Classic period cities. At first glance, the site appears modest clusters of plazas, terraces, and low stone structures arranged around a compact acropolis, but beneath this seemingly simple layout lies a layered architectural history spanning more than 2 millennia. And within that history, a series of technical choices that continue to challenge modern archaeological interpretation. Excavations conducted throughout the 20th century, particularly by the Belize Valley Archaeological Reconnaissance Project and later by the Cahal Pech Archaeological Project in the 1980s and 90s, revealed that the visible structures are only the latest phase of a deeply stratified construction sequence. Earlier buildings were not demolished but entombed, forming dense architectural cores upon which newer phases were erected. This practice required not only an understanding of structural stability, but also a remarkable control over materials, especially stone and plaster, at a level of precision that seems disproportionate to the tools traditionally attributed to the Maya. What has drawn increasing attention in recent decades is not merely the existence of these constructions, but the extraordinary refinement of the masonry and surface treatments, particularly the combination of cut limestone blocks and lime-based stucco coatings. Close analysis of exposed wall sections shows that many of the stones were shaped to fit with minimal gaps, often less than a few millimeters, creating joints so tight that in some cases even modern probes struggle to penetrate them. This is especially striking given that the Maya are generally believed to have lacked metal tools capable of precision cutting comparable to iron or steel implements. Instead, they relied on harder stone tools such as chert and obsidian, materials that, while sharp, are brittle and difficult to control for sustained shaping of large blocks. Yet at Cahal Pech, certain wall faces display a consistency of alignment and flatness that rivals masonry from far later periods. For comparison, similar joint precision is often cited in Inca sites like Sacsayhuaman, where polygonal stones interlock seamlessly, or in certain Egyptian Old Kingdom constructions, where copper tools were used alongside abrasive techniques. In both cases, however, the technological context includes either more advanced metallurgy or large-scale state organization capable of supporting specialized labor. At Cahal Pech, the same level of care appears in a much earlier and ostensibly less technologically equipped society. Even more enigmatic is the stucco that coats many of these stone surfaces. This plaster, produced by heating limestone to create quicklime and then mixing it with water and aggregates, forms a smooth, durable outer layer that not only protects the underlying masonry, but also provides a surface for pigments and decorative finishes. Chemical analyses of stucco samples from Cahal, Pech, and other Maya sites indicate that the production process required temperatures exceeding several hundred degrees Celsius levels that demand sustained, controlled firing conditions. Experimental archaeology has shown that achieving such temperatures consistently with simple open fires is extremely challenging. suggesting that the Maya must have developed specialized keyline-like structures or fuel management techniques. Furthermore, microscopic examination reveals that some stucco layers were applied in multiple coats, each carefully smoothed and sometimes burnished to create a near-polished finish. In certain contexts, these coatings have survived for over 2,000 years, despite exposure to tropical humidity, seasonal rainfall, and biological growth, raising questions about their long-term chemical stability. Comparisons with Roman concrete, particularly the hydraulic mixtures used in ancient harbors that have endured for millennia, are inevitable. In both cases, ancient builders produced materials whose durability rivals or exceeds many modern equivalents, yet the precise recipes and methods were either lost or only partially understood until recent scientific investigation. However, while Roman concrete has been extensively studied with modern analytical techniques, including X-ray diffraction and electron microscopy, the stucco of early Maya sites like Cahal, Pech remains less thoroughly characterized. Preliminary studies suggest variations in composition, including the possible inclusion of organic binders or additives that could influence setting time and resistance to cracking. The absence of written technical manuals or inscriptions describing these processes compounds the mystery, leaving researchers to reconstruct the technology indirectly through material evidence. Excavation reports from the 1980s and early 2000s document instances where underlying construction phases at Cahal Pech exhibit even finer workmanship than later additions, implying that certain techniques may have been refined early and then gradually simplified or altered over time. This challenges the common assumption of linear technological progress and instead suggests cycles of knowledge accumulation and loss. In some substructures, archaeologists have noted stone faces that appear to have been deliberately ground or polished before being sealed within later construction, an effort that seems excessive if the surfaces were never intended to be seen again. Such choices hint at ritual or symbolic motivations intertwined with technical practice, but they also raise the possibility that the builders adhered to standards or traditions whose practical rationale is no longer evident. Another dimension of the puzzle lies in the sourcing and preparation of raw materials. The limestone used at Cahal Pech is locally available, yet its transformation into uniform building blocks and fine stucco required coordinated extraction, transport, and processing. Estimates based on volume calculations suggest that even a single major platform could involve thousands of cubic meters of stone and plaster, representing a substantial investment of labor and energy. When considering that lime production involves not only quarrying, but also burning large quantities of fuel, typically wood, the environmental and logistical implications become significant. How such processes were organized in a relatively early Maya community, and how they were sustained over centuries without apparent resource depletion severe enough to halt construction, remains an open question. Archaeological campaigns have also uncovered tool marks and construction debris that provide partial clues to the techniques employed. However, these traces are often ambiguous, and in many cases, the final surfaces have been so thoroughly finished that direct evidence of intermediate steps has been erased. This absence of clear working marks contrasts with sites where quarrying and shaping stages are more visibly preserved, making it difficult to reconstruct the full chaîne opératoire, the sequence of actions from raw material to finished structure. As a result, researchers must rely on experimental replication, attempting to reproduce similar results using hypothesized tools and methods. These experiments have had mixed success. While it is possible to approximate certain finishes, achieving the same consistency and efficiency observed at Cahal Pech often proves time-consuming and labor-intensive, reinforcing the impression that the original builders possessed a refined, perhaps highly specialized skill set. Without advanced metal tools or written technical records, what do you think allowed the Maya at Cahal Pech to achieve such astonishing precision in stonework and stucco? Where are you watching this video from, and what time of day is it for you? Share your location and time in the comments below. Deep within the rugged limestone landscape of Shan State, the Padalin Caves remain one of Southeast Asia's most compelling archaeological enigmas, a site where human presence is not merely recorded, but preserved with a level of material sophistication that continues to challenge modern science. First systematically documented and excavated by Myanmar archaeologists during the 1960s, with subsequent research phases extending into later decades, the caves revealed a dense concentration of prehistoric activity, including more than 300 rock paintings, stone tools, animal bones, and charcoal deposits. Radiocarbon dating of associated materials has placed human occupation at least 11,000 years into the past, although some researchers suggest even earlier intermittent use. Yet, among all these findings, one element stands out with unusual clarity and defies easy explanation: the red pigment that still clings vividly to the cave walls, resisting time, moisture, and chemical decay in ways that remain only partially understood. The pigment, primarily derived from ochre-rich in hematite, should theoretically be vulnerable to the environmental conditions inside the cave. Padalin exists within a tropical climate system, characterized by high humidity, seasonal monsoon cycles, and constant temperature fluctuations, all factors known to accelerate the degradation of mineral pigments and organic compounds. In comparable environments, pigments applied without sophisticated binders typically fade, flake, or dissolve within a fraction of this timescale. Yet here, after more than 11 millennia, the red markings, hand stencils, abstract symbols, and animal forms retain both their chromatic intensity and their adhesion to the limestone substrate. This durability immediately raises a fundamental technological question. What combination of materials and techniques allowed these prehistoric artists to achieve a result that modern conservation science still struggles to replicate under similar conditions? Laboratory analyses conducted on small pigment samples have confirmed the presence of iron oxide as the primary coloring agent. But more intriguing is the detection of degraded organic residues, suggesting that the pigment was not applied in its raw mineral form alone. These residues hint at the use of binding agents, possibly plant resins, tree sap, or animal fats that could have enhanced adhesion and resistance to moisture. However, the exact composition of these organic additives has not been fully reconstructed. Over thousands of years, organic molecules break down into fragments, leaving behind only partial chemical signatures that are difficult to interpret conclusively. As a result, scientists are left with an incomplete formula. They can identify the ingredients in general terms, but not the precise ratios, preparation methods, or processing conditions that produce such long-lasting results. This places Padalin in a unique position, not merely as an archaeological site, but as a case study in lost material knowledge, evidence of a prehistoric technology that was empirically effective, yet remains beyond full modern replication. The mystery deepens when Padalin is compared to other globally recognized cave art sites. The paintings of Lascaux Cave in France, for example, have survived for approximately 17,000 years and are often cited as masterpieces of Paleolithic art. However, Lascaux exists within a relatively stable, dry, and controlled microclimate, where temperature and humidity remain consistent and external environmental stressors are minimal. In contrast, Padalin is subject to far more aggressive environmental conditions, where water infiltration, microbial activity, and thermal variation should theoretically accelerate pigment decay. Despite this, the visual integrity of the Padalin paintings remains remarkably intact. This discrepancy suggests that the difference cannot be explained by environmental factors alone. Instead, it points toward the possibility that the prehistoric inhabitants of Padalin developed a distinct approach to pigment preparation and application, one that may have enhanced durability at a microscopic level. One hypothesis proposed by researchers involves the interaction between the pigment and the limestone substrate. Limestone is a porous material composed primarily of calcium carbonate, and under certain conditions, it can undergo chemical reactions with iron oxides and organic compounds. It is possible that the pigment mixture used at Padalin penetrated the micropores of the rock surface and subsequently underwent a form of mineral bonding or crystallization, effectively locking the color into the stone. Such a process would transform the pigment from a superficial coating into an integrated part of the rock itself. However, this hypothesis remains incomplete, as similar interactions have not consistently been observed in other limestone cave environments with comparable pigments. This inconsistency suggests that additional variables such as surface preparation, particle size, or application technique may have played a critical role. Archaeological evidence from the site supports the idea that these variables were indeed controlled. In several sections of the cave, the rock surface appears to have been deliberately modified prior to painting. Areas containing artwork often show smoother textures compared to surrounding surfaces, indicating that they may have been cleaned, scraped, or lightly abraded to create a more suitable base. Such preparation would have increased the surface area for pigment adhesion and potentially facilitated deeper penetration into the rock's microstructure. This implies a level of procedural knowledge. The artists were not simply applying pigment at random, but following a sequence of steps that optimize the final result. In modern terms, this resembles a rudimentary form of surface engineering. The method of pigment application further reinforces this impression of technical sophistication. Many of the most striking images at Padalin are hand stencils created through a negative spraying technique. By placing a hand against the rock and blowing pigment around it, the artist produced sharply defined silhouettes with consistent color distribution. Achieving this effect requires more than a simple act of blowing powder. It demands control over airflow, particle size, and pigment consistency. The pigment must be finely ground to form a uniform aerosol, and the force of the air must be regulated to ensure even coverage without dispersing the material too widely. The resulting images, with their crisp edges and balanced tonal density, suggest that these parameters were well understood and repeatable. This level of control hints at an iterative process, trial and error refined over generations, leading to a stable and effective technique. Excavation layers within the cave also reveal long-term habitation, indicated by repeated deposits of ash and charcoal. The sustained use of fire in an enclosed environment introduces another possible factor influencing pigment durability: heat. Controlled exposure to heat could have altered the chemical structure of the pigment or the rock surface, potentially enhancing bonding or driving off moisture that would otherwise weaken adhesion. While there is currently no definitive experimental evidence linking heat treatment to the preservation of Padalin pigments, the coexistence of fire use and durable artwork invites further investigation. It raises the possibility that what appears to be a simple habitation practice may have had unintended or perhaps even intentional effects on material stability. When all these elements are considered together, mineral pigments combined with organic binders, prepared rock surfaces, finely controlled application techniques, and a dynamic environmental context, it becomes increasingly difficult to attribute the durability of Padalin's red paintings to chance alone. Instead, the evidence points toward a form of accumulated practical knowledge. a proto-scientific understanding of materials and processes that allowed prehistoric humans to manipulate their environment with surprising effectiveness. This knowledge was likely transmitted orally and through practice, rather than written or formally codified, making it vulnerable to loss over time. What remains today is not the knowledge itself, but its outcome, a set of physical traces that continue to resist both natural decay and complete scientific explanation. Do you think the red pigment at Padalin caves is merely a coincidence or evidence of a lost ancient material technology? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Rising from the dense tropical landscape surrounding Sigiriya in Sri Lanka, the Sigiriya jungle gardens do not immediately present themselves as a technological marvel. At first glance, they appear to be a serene royal landscape of pools, terraces, and pathways carved into the earth more than 15 centuries ago. Yet beneath this tranquil surface lies one of the most perplexing engineering achievements of the ancient world, a landscape that behaves less like a garden and more like a precisely calibrated machine. Constructed during the reign of King Kashyapa in the 5th century CE, the gardens were not merely ornamental, but functioned as a complex, integrated system of water management, geometric planning, and material science. Archaeological investigations conducted throughout the 20th and early 21st centuries, particularly by the Sri Lankan Department of Archaeology and researchers such as Senake Bandaranayake, have revealed that Sigiriya's design reflects an extraordinary level of technical sophistication that challenges conventional assumptions about early historic engineering in South Asia. The site is divided into distinct zones, including water gardens, boulder gardens, and terraced gardens, each carefully arranged along a central axis, extending from west to east toward the towering rock citadel. Measurements taken during detailed site surveys show that the layout adheres to a near-perfect bilateral symmetry, with deviations often measured in mere centimeters across distances of several hundred meters, an accuracy that rivals planned landscapes of much later periods, such as Mughal gardens in India or Renaissance estates in Europe. Excavations have uncovered an intricate network of underground conduits, channels, and reservoirs feeding the pools and fountains, some of which still function during the rainy season today. These conduits, often constructed from precisely cut stone slabs fitted tightly together, demonstrate not only advanced hydraulic knowledge but also an ability to maintain consistent gradients over long distances, ensuring controlled water flow without modern surveying instruments. However, the most astonishing and least fully explained aspect of Sigiriya lies in its construction materials and waterproofing technologies features that push the site firmly into the realm of ancient technological mystery. The retaining walls of the pools and canals are coated with a specialized plaster or mortar that exhibits remarkable durability and water resistance. Scientific analyses of samples taken from these surfaces indicate a composite material likely composed of finely ground limestone, clay, organic additives, and possibly plant resins or oils, forming a dense, cohesive layer that prevents water seepage. What makes this particularly striking is that even after approximately 1,500 years of exposure to monsoonal rains, fluctuating temperatures, and biological growth, many of these surfaces remain intact and functional, with minimal leakage observed in certain restored sections. Comparisons with other ancient waterproofing technologies highlight the uniqueness of Sigiriya's materials. Roman hydraulic concrete, used in structures such as the harbors of the Mediterranean and famously resilient marine constructions, relied on a mixture of lime and volcanic ash, pozzolana, to create a chemical reaction that strengthened over time in contact with water. In contrast, Sri Lanka lacks natural deposits of pozzolanic ash comparable to those found near Mount Vesuvius, suggesting that the builders of Sigiriya developed an alternative formulation suited to their local environment. Similarly, while ancient Indian stepwells and reservoirs often employed stone lining and lime plaster, few demonstrate the same long-term resistance to water infiltration under tropical conditions as observed at Sigiriya. Laboratory attempts to replicate the exact composition of the Sigiriya plaster have so far produced only partial success, with modern mixtures failing to achieve the same combination of adhesion, impermeability, and longevity, indicating that some aspect of the original material science remains incompletely understood. Further complicating the picture is the evidence of layered construction techniques within the hydraulic structures. Core samples extracted during conservation work reveal multiple strata within the plaster coatings, suggesting that the builders applied successive layers with varying compositions, possibly to enhance bonding, flexibility, and resistance to cracking. This multi-layer approach resembles modern engineering practices used in waterproof membranes and coatings, where different layers serve distinct structural and protective functions. Yet, there is no surviving textual record from the period describing such methods, leaving archaeologists to infer the techniques solely from physical evidence. The precision with which these layers were applied, often maintaining uniform thicknesses of just a few millimeters, raises additional questions about the tools and quality control processes available to the ancient builders. The integration of this advanced material technology with the broader hydraulic system further underscores its sophistication. The pools and channels were not static features, but part of a dynamic system designed to capture, store, and redistribute water across the site. During periods of heavy rainfall, excess water would be directed through overflow channels into secondary reservoirs, preventing damage to the primary structures. At the same time, the impermeable coatings ensured that stored water remained available for extended periods, supporting both aesthetic features such as fountains and practical needs within the royal complex. Modern hydrological studies have suggested that the system was capable of maintaining stable water levels despite seasonal variations, implying a deep understanding of local rainfall patterns and soil permeability. Archaeological excavations conducted in the late 20th century uncovered additional evidence of technological refinement, including terracotta pipes used in certain sections of the system. These pipes, carefully joined and sealed, indicate that the builders employed a combination of materials, stone, plaster, and ceramic to optimize performance under different conditions. The joints between pipes and channels show signs of deliberate sealing compounds, further reinforcing the emphasis on preventing leakage. In some cases, these seals remain effective today, a testament to the durability of the materials and the skill of their application. When viewed in a broader historical context, the technological achievements of Sigiriya challenge the linear narrative of engineering progress. While similar levels of hydraulic sophistication would later appear in medieval Islamic gardens or early modern European estates, the integration of advanced waterproofing, precise geometry, and environmental adaptation at Sigiriya predates many of these developments by centuries. This raises the possibility that certain knowledge systems, particularly in materials science, were developed independently and perhaps lost or transformed over time, leaving only fragmentary evidence in surviving structures. Despite decades of research, significant questions remain unanswered. The exact composition of the waterproofing materials, the methods used to measure and maintain precise gradients, and the organizational structure required to coordinate such a large-scale construction project are all subjects of ongoing investigation. Experimental archaeology has attempted to recreate sections of the hydraulic system using hypothesized materials and techniques, but the results have yet to fully match the performance of the original structures. This gap between ancient achievement and modern replication underscores the enigmatic nature of Sigiriya's technology. If you were a modern engineer, do you think you could accurately recreate Sigiriya's waterproofing technology using only ancient natural materials? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden within the limestone cliffs near Ipoh, the ancient red figures of the Tambun cave paintings appear, at first glance, almost deceptively simple, primitive silhouettes of animals, human forms, and abstract shapes brushed onto rock by hands that lived thousands of years ago. Yet the deeper researchers look, the more these paintings resist simple explanations, especially when examined through the lens of material science. The most perplexing aspect is not their artistic content, but the astonishing durability of their pigment and endurance that, by modern standards, should not be possible in such an exposed tropical environment. Radiocarbon dating and stylistic comparisons suggest that many of these paintings were created somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 years ago, with some estimates pushing even earlier, depending on the specific panel and weathering layer analyzed during surveys conducted in the mid-20th century and later revisited by Malaysian archaeological teams in the 19%, 70s, and early 2000s. Despite this immense age, the red ochre figures remain visible, in some cases sharply defined, even though they have been subjected continuously to monsoon rains, fluctuating humidity levels often exceeding 80%, and biological erosion from algae and lichen conditions that would typically degrade exposed pigment within a few centuries at most. The pigment itself is believed to be derived from hematite, an iron oxide mineral widely used in prehistoric art across the world. However, the mere presence of hematite does not explain the phenomenon observed at Tambun. In controlled laboratory conditions, simple hematite-based pigments applied to limestone surfaces without protective binders tend to fade, flake, or wash away relatively quickly when exposed to repeated cycles of moisture and heat. Yet here, on an open rock face with no artificial shelter, the pigment appears to have bonded with the limestone substrate in a manner that suggests either an advanced understanding of material preparation or a process that has not yet been fully reconstructed. Some microscopic analyses conducted on similar Southeast Asian rock art have shown that pigments can penetrate micropores in limestone and undergo chemical stabilization through interactions with calcium carbonate, effectively becoming part of the rock itself rather than merely sitting on its surface. If such a process occurred at Tambun, it raises a critical question. Was this an intentional technique involving specific preparation methods such as grinding, heating, or mixing with organic binders? Or was it an accidental discovery refined through generations of empirical experimentation? Comparisons with other prehistoric art sites only deepen the mystery. In the famous Lascaux cave, dated to approximately 17,000 years ago, the pigments have survived in remarkable condition, but crucially, they are preserved within a sealed cave environment, protected from sunlight, rain, and biological activity. Similarly, the paintings of Altamira Cave owe their longevity to stable internal conditions with minimal exposure to external weathering. Tambun, by contrast, offers no such protection. Its panels are effectively open-air canvases, partially shielded by overhangs but still directly exposed to wind-driven rain and tropical climate cycles. Under such conditions, modern conservation science would predict rapid degradation, yet the opposite is observed. This contradiction suggests that either the environmental microclimate at Tambun is uniquely favorable in ways not yet fully quantified, or the pigment technology itself possesses properties that exceed current expectations of prehistoric materials. Archaeological investigations into the site have been sporadic but revealing. First documented in 1959 by a British military officer, the paintings later attracted the attention of Malaysian archaeologists who conducted surveys and documentation efforts throughout the late 20th century. These studies cataloged dozens of figures across multiple panels, noting variations in pigment intensity, layering, and weathering patterns. Some figures appear superimposed, indicating that the site was revisited and reused over extended periods, possibly spanning centuries or even millennia. This continuity implies not only cultural significance, but also the preservation of knowledge related to pigment preparation and application. If the durability of the paint was indeed the result of a specific technique, then that technique must have been transmitted across generations with a level of consistency that ensured reproducible results, a concept that challenges the common assumption that prehistoric societies relied solely on rudimentary, unsystematic methods. Even more intriguing is the possibility that organic binders were used substances such as plant resins, animal fats, or blood that could have enhanced adhesion and water resistance. While such materials are known in other contexts, their long-term survival in tropical environments is extremely unlikely, as they tend to degrade rapidly. Yet if they were combined with mineral pigments in precise proportions, they might have facilitated initial bonding, after which mineralization processes took over, locking the pigment into the rock. This hypothesis remains difficult to confirm due to the scarcity of intact organic residues, but it aligns with emerging research in archaeochemistry, which increasingly recognizes the sophistication of ancient material practices. In some experimental reconstructions, mixtures of hematite and organic compounds have demonstrated improved durability compared to pure mineral pigment, though still not to the extent observed at Tambun. Another factor to consider is the surface preparation of the rock itself. Close inspection of certain panels suggests that the limestone may have been cleaned, scraped, or even lightly abraded before painting, increasing its porosity and allowing deeper pigment penetration. Such preparation would require not only deliberate effort, but also an understanding, whether intuitive or learned, of how surface conditions affect paint adhesion. When viewed alongside other examples of prehistoric engineering, such as the precisely cut stone blocks of Sigiriya rock fortress, or the enduring pigments found in ancient Egyptian tombs, a broader pattern begins to emerge. Ancient cultures, across different regions and time periods, often achieved levels of material performance that seem disproportionate to the simplicity of their tools. The climatic paradox remains perhaps the most compelling aspect of the Tambun paintings. Malaysia's equatorial environment is characterized by intense rainfall, high temperatures, and constant biological activity, all factors that accelerate chemical and physical weathering. Studies of limestone erosion in similar climates indicate measurable surface loss over relatively short geological timescales. Yet the painted surfaces at Tambun retain identifiable features after thousands of years. This suggests the presence of microenvironmental conditions such as airflow patterns, mineral runoff, or protective mineral films that may slow degradation. However, no single factor identified so far fully accounts for the observed preservation, reinforcing the idea that multiple variables, including the original paint composition, are at play. Is the extraordinary durability of the paintings at Tambun Cave Paintings the result of a lost ancient technology, or simply a natural phenomenon we still don't fully understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden within the fertile Copan Valley of western Honduras, the ancient city of Copan Ruinas emerges not merely as a ceremonial center of the Maya civilization, but as a place where architecture, mathematics, and astronomy appear to converge with a level of precision that continues to challenge modern understanding. First documented in detail in the 19th century by John Lloyd Stephens and visually immortalized by Frederick Catherwood, Copan quickly distinguished itself from other Maya sites due to the density of its inscriptions and the extraordinary refinement of its carved monuments. Yet it was only through systematic excavations, particularly those conducted by the Carnegie Institution of Washington in the 1930s, and later expanded by the Harvard University Peabody Museum and the Instituto Hondureño de Antropología y Historia, that the deeper, more perplexing dimensions of Copan began to emerge. Radiocarbon dating and ceramic sequencing placed the peak of Copan's development between the 5th and 9th centuries of the Common Era, with its political and cultural zenith occurring under rulers such as Uahaklajun Uba Ka'awil. However, beyond its dynastic history, what has drawn the sustained attention of archaeologists and archaeoastronomers alike is the city's architectural alignment, an intricate system that appears to encode celestial cycles with remarkable accuracy. Unlike many ancient settlements that grew organically, Copan exhibits signs of deliberate spatial planning, particularly in the orientation of its principal structures. The Acropolis, the Great Plaza, and the Ball Court form a network of axes that have been measured and remeasured across multiple surveys since the late 20th century. These measurements reveal that certain sightlines correspond closely to key solar events, including the summer solstice sunrise and the winter solstice sunset. In some cases, deviations from the exact solar azimuth are measured at less than 2 degrees, an astonishing level of precision when one considers the absence of metal instruments, optical devices, or standardized measurement tools. For comparison, the alignment of the central axis at Stonehenge, often celebrated as one of the most precise prehistoric solar observatories, exhibits a similar margin of error, while the shadow serpent phenomenon at Chichén Itzá depends on carefully calculated angles of sunlight during the equinoxes. Yet Copan differs in a crucial respect. Its alignments are not isolated to a single structure or visual effect, but are distributed across an entire urban landscape, suggesting a systemic integration of astronomical knowledge into city planning itself. This integration becomes even more compelling when one considers the role of planetary observation, particularly the cycle of Venus cycle, which held profound ritual significance for the Maya. Although direct observational instruments have not been recovered, epigraphic evidence, especially from the hieroglyphic stairway, the longest known Maya inscription, composed of over 2,000 glyphs, indicates that Copan's elite maintained highly detailed calendrical systems. The Maya were capable of calculating the synodic period of Venus at approximately 584 days, a figure confirmed by the Dresden Codex and accurate to within a fraction of a day over long cycles. The implication is unavoidable. If such precision existed in their written records, it is plausible that the same observational rigor was translated into architectural alignments. Some researchers have proposed that the orientation of specific platforms and corridors at Copan may have functioned as sighting devices, allowing observers to track the heliacal rising or setting of Venus against the horizon. Though this hypothesis remains under active investigation, archaeological tunneling beneath the visible structures has added yet another layer of complexity to this puzzle. Beginning in the 1970s and continuing into the early 21st century, extensive tunnel systems were excavated within the Acropolis, revealing earlier construction phases buried intact within later pyramids. These inner temples, such as the famous Rosalila structure, not only display exceptional preservation but also retain their original orientations, which align closely with those of the overlying buildings. This continuity suggests that astronomical alignment was not an incidental feature, but a foundational principle maintained across successive generations of construction. Engineers and archaeologists analyzing these findings have emphasized the difficulty of preserving such alignment over centuries, particularly in a context where each new layer would alter sightlines, elevation, and horizon visibility. Maintaining consistency would have required a stable reference framework, possibly based on repeated horizon observations or fixed markers in the surrounding landscape. Comparative studies with other major Maya centers further underscore Copan's distinctiveness. Sites such as Tikal and Uxmal certainly exhibit astronomical considerations in their layouts, yet these are often concentrated in specific ceremonial complexes or observatory-like structures. At Copan, by contrast, astronomical alignment appears diffused throughout the urban fabric, embedded in plazas, stairways, and even sculptural arrangements. This raises the possibility that the city itself functioned as a large-scale cosmological model, where movement through space corresponded to movement through time and celestial cycles. Modern technologies, including LiDAR scanning and GIS-based horizon modeling, have begun to test these interpretations, revealing potential alignments with distant topographical features such as mountain ridges that may have served as natural markers for solar and planetary events. If confirmed, such findings would imply that Copan's observational system extended far beyond the immediate site, incorporating the broader landscape into its astronomical framework. Yet perhaps the most perplexing aspect of Copan's precision lies not in the alignments themselves, but in the methods by which they were achieved. Without telescopes, compasses, or metal sighting instruments, the Maya would have relied on naked-eye observations, simple tools, and long-term record-keeping. Achieving an error margin of less than 2 degrees would require observations repeated over many years, if not generations, with careful attention to seasonal variation, atmospheric refraction, and changes in the local horizon caused by vegetation or construction. This suggests the existence of a highly disciplined class of observer priests, capable of maintaining and transmitting complex astronomical knowledge across centuries. However, the absence of physical instruments leaves a critical gap in our understanding. We see the results of their measurements, but not the tools or processes that produced them. The implications of this gap extend beyond Copan itself, touching on broader questions about the nature of ancient technology. If we define technology narrowly, as the use of advanced tools and machinery, then Copan appears anomalous, an advanced outcome achieved with seemingly limited means. But if we adopt a broader definition, encompassing systematic knowledge, observational techniques, and the ability to encode information into durable forms, then Copan may represent a form of technological sophistication that is no less advanced for being different. Its builders transformed the city into a fixed record of celestial motion, embedding cycles of the sun and possibly Venus into stone with a precision that rivals some modern constructions. Without modern tools, how do you think the Maya at Copan Ruinas achieved such incredible astronomical precision? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The Ak Eo archaeological site emerges from the flat, waterlogged landscape of the Mekong Delta, not as a simple ruin, but as a layered technological puzzle, one that continues to challenge modern assumptions about what ancient societies in Southeast Asia were capable of achieving. First systematically documented in the 1940s by French archaeologist Louis Malleret, Ak Eo quickly revealed itself as a major urban center of the ancient Funan civilization, active roughly from the 1st to the 7th centuries. Yet what has made the site endure in academic debate is not merely its role as a trade hub, but the unsettling precision embedded in its material culture precision that, even when compared with contemporaneous civilizations, such as those of Rome or South Asia, seems unexpectedly advanced. Across multiple excavation campaigns from early French surveys in the 1940s to expanded Vietnamese archaeological programs in the 1970s and more recent interdisciplinary studies in the early 21st century, thousands of artifacts have been uncovered, forming a dataset that is as rich as it is perplexing. Among the most striking discoveries are the gold artifacts, rings, pendants, amulets, and decorative plates that display an extraordinary level of micro-detail. Under magnification, many of these objects reveal symmetry so exact that deviations are nearly imperceptible, suggesting a controlled and repeatable production process. Some pieces employ techniques analogous to granulation and filigree methods that involve fusing extremely small gold spheres or drawing ultra-fine wires into complex patterns. These techniques are well documented in Mediterranean contexts, particularly in Etruscan and Roman jewelry traditions, yet their presence at Auk Io raises difficult questions. In Europe, such methods evolved gradually over centuries, supported by clear archaeological evidence of workshops, tools, and intermediate stages of craftsmanship. At Auk Io, however, the appearance of similarly refined techniques seems comparatively abrupt, with limited transitional forms to trace a local developmental sequence. Chemical analyses conducted on several gold samples indicate purity levels often exceeding 90 to 95%, implying not only access to high-quality raw material, but also an ability to refine and control metallurgical processes with notable precision. Achieving such consistency would require furnaces capable of maintaining stable temperatures. Along with an understanding of alloy behavior, yet physical remains of such advanced metallurgical installations remain scarce or ambiguous within the site. This discrepancy between output and infrastructure is one of the central mysteries. In well-documented Roman sites like Pompeii, archaeologists have uncovered entire workshops, complete with tools, molds, slag, and partially finished goods, allowing for a near-complete reconstruction of production techniques. At Auk Io, by contrast, while molds and fragments of workshop areas have been identified, they do not fully account for the level of refinement observed in finished artifacts. This has led some researchers to propose that either perishable materials, such as wooden tools or organic components of furnaces, have simply not survived in the deltaic environment, or that key aspects of the technology were fundamentally different from those used in better documented regions. Either possibility points to a gap in current understanding rather than a definitive explanation. Beyond metallurgy, the site also presents compelling evidence of advanced craftsmanship in stone and glass. Several carved stone objects, including religious sculptures and architectural fragments, exhibit surfaces polished to a degree that suggests prolonged and controlled abrasion using fine-grained materials. In certain instances, linear grooves and circular perforations appear so regular that they evoke the use of rotational drilling techniques. While bow drills and similar devices are known from ancient contexts, the consistency of these marks, especially on relatively hard stone, raises questions about the level of mechanical control achieved. Even more intriguing are the glass and semi-precious stone beads discovered in large quantities. Analytical studies have traced some of these materials to distant regions, including the Indian subcontinent and possibly areas as far west as the Middle East. Yet, despite their diverse origins, the beads found at Auk Io often display remarkable uniformity in size, shape, and perforation diameter, suggesting standardized production methods. Such standardization implies not just skilled individual artisans, but organized systems of manufacture, quality control, and perhaps even early forms of industrial specialization. Comparative analysis further deepens the enigma. When placed alongside artifacts from the Indus Valley civilization, known for its bead-making and urban planning, Auk Io's materials hold their own in terms of precision and finish. In some cases, the micro-drilling of beads requiring extremely fine and durable drill tips appears equally sophisticated, if not more so. Similarly, when compared to Roman craftsmanship, particularly in jewelry and glasswork, the level of detail achieved at Ak-Io does not seem technologically inferior, despite the geographical and cultural distance. This raises a fundamental question. Were these techniques independently developed, representing a parallel technological trajectory, or were they the result of knowledge transfer through long-distance trade networks? If the latter, how was such knowledge adapted and maintained in a local context without leaving clearer traces of its transmission? Another layer of complexity is introduced by what might be described as over-engineering. Many artifacts from Ak-Io exhibit levels of detail that exceed functional necessity. Decorative elements are executed with such care that they suggest purposes beyond mere utility, perhaps symbolic, ritualistic, or indicative of social status. Yet, without written records directly explaining these choices, interpretation remains speculative. What is clear, however, is that the artisans of Ak-Io were not merely capable of precision, they actively pursued it, investing time and resources into achieving finishes that even modern observers find impressive. Archaeological surveys using aerial photography and sediment analysis have also revealed that these production activities were integrated into a broader system of canals and urban planning. Workshops appear to have been strategically located along waterways, facilitating the movement of raw materials and finished goods. This integration suggests a level of logistical organization consistent with complex state societies, further reinforcing the idea that Ak-Io was not an isolated anomaly, but part of a larger, highly coordinated network. Yet, even within this broader context, the core mystery remains unresolved. The technological sophistication evident in the artifacts is not fully matched by the surviving evidence of how they were made. In the final analysis, the Ak-Io archaeological site challenges the idea that technological progress follows a simple, linear path. Its refined gold work, precisely drilled beads, and polished stone suggest a level of material knowledge that remains only partially understood. Without clear evidence of the tools or systems behind it, a key question persists. How did this civilization achieve such remarkable precision with the technology we assume they had? Was the extraordinary craftsmanship at Ak-Io archaeological site the result of independent development or evidence of a lost body of knowledge? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Beneath the seemingly unremarkable agricultural plains of northeastern Thailand lies one of the most intellectually unsettling archaeological sites in Southeast Asia, Ban Non Wat. At first glance, it appears to be just another prehistoric settlement, but decades of excavation have revealed something far more complex. A densely layered record of human occupation stretching from approximately 1700 BCE into the Iron Age, preserved in an extraordinary sequence of over 100 superimposed burial phases. Excavations conducted between 2000 and 2011 by joint teams from the University of Otago and the Fine Arts Department of Thailand uncovered more than 600 graves, each containing artifacts that collectively tell a story not of gradual development, but of sudden technological acceleration. Among these discoveries, one aspect stands out with particular intensity: the emergence of bronze metallurgy that appears by multiple measurable criteria to be significantly more advanced than what the regional timeline would predict. The bronze artifacts from Ban Non Wat axes, bangles, chisels, spearheads are not unusual in form, but their internal composition tells a different story. Laboratory analyses, including metallographic studies and compositional testing, have repeatedly shown that many of these objects contain tin concentrations within a narrow band of roughly 8 to 12%. In modern metallurgical understanding, this range is not arbitrary. It represents a near optimal ratio for balancing hardness, durability, and castability in bronze. What makes this remarkable is not simply that such ratios exist, but that they appear consistently across multiple artifacts recovered from different burial layers separated by centuries. In early metallurgical traditions elsewhere, including sites such as Ban Chiang, alloy compositions tend to vary widely, reflecting experimental processes or decentralized production. At Ban Non Wat, by contrast, the data suggests a level of repeatability and control that implies either standardized production methods or a highly effective system of knowledge transmission, both of which are difficult to reconcile with the absence of clear. Workshop remains. Even more striking is the indirect evidence for thermal precision. Under microscopic examination, the crystalline structures of several bronze artifacts indicate that the metal was heated to temperatures exceeding 1000 degrees Celsius, sufficient to fully liquefy copper and allow for uniform alloying with tin. In some cases, cooling patterns suggest controlled solidification, a process that improves mechanical strength and reduces brittleness. Achieving such results requires not only high temperatures, but also an ability to regulate airflow, fuel input, and furnace conditions, factors typically associated with well-developed smelting technologies. Yet, despite extensive excavation covering thousands of square meters, archaeologists have found only fragmentary traces of furnaces, and no complete smelting installations that would correspond to such capabilities. This absence creates a profound contradiction. The metallurgical outputs are technically sophisticated, but the infrastructure required to produce them remains largely invisible. Radiocarbon dating adds another layer of complexity to this puzzle. Several bronze-bearing burial contexts at Ban Non Wat have been dated to periods that overlap with, or even precede, the widespread adoption of bronze technology in neighboring regions of mainland Southeast Asia. This raises the possibility that the site was not merely adopting external innovations, but may have been participating in an independent or parallel trajectory of metallurgical development. Supporting this hypothesis is geochemical evidence indicating that some of the copper used in these artifacts originated from sources located hundreds of kilometers away. Such findings imply the existence of long-distance exchange networks capable of transporting raw materials across significant geographic distances. However, no definitive evidence of the routes, mechanisms, or organizational structures behind these networks has been identified, leaving open the question of how such complex logistical systems were maintained. When compared to contemporaneous civilizations, the anomaly becomes even more pronounced. In the ancient Near East, for example, bronze metallurgy is accompanied by abundant archaeological evidence of production, including slag deposits, furnace remains, molds, and specialized tools. Similarly, in Shang Dynasty China, large-scale bronze casting is supported by extensive foundry complexes and standardized mold systems. Ban Non Wat, in contrast, presents a scenario in which the finished products exhibit comparable levels of material optimization, yet the supporting technological framework is almost entirely absent from the archaeological record. This discrepancy suggests that either the production methods were fundamentally different, perhaps relying on perishable materials or highly efficient, low-footprint techniques, or that critical evidence has been lost to time in ways that disproportionately obscure the manufacturing process while preserving the end results. Further complicating the picture is the apparent standardization in artifact morphology. Certain classes of objects, particularly socketed axes and ornamental bangles, display dimensions and shapes that remain consistent across multiple burial phases. This level of uniformity implies the use of molds with fixed internal geometries, which in turn suggests a degree of planning and replication not typically associated with small-scale, community-based production. Yet again, the molds themselves are rarely found intact, and when they are present, they are often too fragmentary to provide a complete understanding of their design or use. This recurring pattern precision without provenance reinforces the sense that Ban Non Wat represents a technological system whose most critical components have somehow eluded preservation. The social implications of this metallurgical sophistication are equally significant. Bronze artifacts are not distributed evenly across the burial population. Instead, they are concentrated in specific graves, often accompanied by a rich array of goods including ceramics, shell ornaments, and exotic stones. In some instances, individuals interred with multiple bronze objects appear to occupy positions of elevated status within the community. Notably, several of these high-status burials belong to children, suggesting that access to metallurgical products and possibly the knowledge behind them may have been inherited rather than acquired. This pattern points toward a structured society organized around lineage or elite control, in which technological expertise functioned as both a practical skill and a source of social power. Despite more than a decade of systematic excavation and increasingly sophisticated analytical techniques, the central question remains unresolved. How did the inhabitants of Ban Non Wat achieve such a high level of metallurgical precision without leaving behind the expected traces of production? Was their knowledge derived from external sources, transmitted through networks that have yet to be fully mapped? Or does the site represent an independent center of innovation, one that developed its own methods and traditions outside the main currents of known technological history? The evidence, as it stands, supports elements of all these possibilities, yet confirms none of them conclusively. If Ban Non Wat truly possessed such advanced metallurgical technology, do you think they developed it independently or inherited it from another civilization? Share your theory in the comments below. Rising in quiet isolation beneath the sacred mountain of Cahal, Vat Fu presents itself not merely as an ancient Khmer sanctuary, but as a deeply perplexing engineering achievement whose technical sophistication continues to challenge modern assumptions about early construction capabilities. Developed over a long period stretching from roughly the 5th to the 13th century, the site formed part of a wider cultural and infrastructural network that would later culminate in monumental complexes such as Angkor Wat. Yet, despite its smaller scale, Vat Fu reveals a level of precision in stoneworking that, in some respects, appears even more controlled and refined. Early documentation by researchers from the École Française d'Extrême Orient in the early 20th century already noted unusual characteristics in the masonry, but it was not until restoration and survey campaigns conducted throughout the late 20th and early 21st centuries under the supervision of UNESCO that the full extent of this precision began to be quantified. At the heart of the mystery lies the way stone was cut, shaped, and assembled across the terraces, stairways, and sanctuaries of Vat Fu. The primary material, sandstone, while more workable than igneous rocks like basalt, still requires consistent force and careful control to produce flat planes and tight joints. Yet across multiple structures at the site, archaeologists have measured contact surfaces between adjoining blocks that deviate by less than 1 millimeter over spans approaching or exceeding 1 meter. In practical terms, this means that the stones were shaped with a degree of flatness and alignment comparable to what modern engineers would expect from mechanically processed surfaces. Even more striking is the near absence of mortar. The blocks rely almost entirely on gravity, friction, and precise fitting to maintain stability. In some preserved sections, attempts to insert a thin metal blade between stones fail completely, indicating tolerances that approach modern machining standards. Such observations were confirmed during conservation work in the 1990s, when engineers documented repeated instances of near-perfect joins across different structural levels, suggesting that this was not an isolated achievement, but a consistent construction principle. When compared to other ancient sites, the uniqueness of Vat Fu becomes even more apparent. At Machu Picchu, the Inca achieved extraordinary stone fits using hard granite, but their method relied on shaping irregular polygonal blocks through repeated trial and error fitting, producing joints that are tight but often non-linear. By contrast, many stones at Vat Fu display linear edges and flat surfaces that align along straight lines, implying a more standardized and possibly pre-planned shaping process. Meanwhile, at the Giza Plateau, limestone blocks in the pyramids exhibit remarkable scale and alignment, but still often rely on mortar and do not consistently achieve the same level of tight contact seen at Vat Fu in smaller details. This raises a critical question. How did Khmer builders achieve such uniform precision across multiple structures without the benefit of steel tools, powered machinery, or advanced measurement systems? The mystery deepens when examining the carved details within the temple. Decorative elements such as lintels and pediments, many depicting Hindu deities like Shiva, exhibit intricate bas-relief work carved directly into sandstone surfaces. Under close inspection, these carvings reveal tool marks that are not only consistent in depth, but also in spacing, suggesting a level of control that goes beyond simple manual chiseling. Experimental attempts by modern craftsmen using iron tools comparable to those available in the Khmer period have struggled to replicate these results without producing visible inconsistencies or microfractures in the stone. Some researchers have proposed that ancient artisans may have used abrasive techniques involving sand and water to gradually grind surfaces into precise shapes, a hypothesis also raised in studies of Egyptian stoneworking, but direct archaeological evidence for such methods at Vat Fu remains limited. No tools specifically designed for high-precision grinding have been conclusively identified at the site, leaving the technical process largely speculative. Transporting and positioning these precisely shaped blocks adds yet another layer of complexity. Geological surveys indicate that much of the sandstone was sourced from quarries located several kilometers away, possibly along the Mekong Basin. Individual blocks can weigh several tons, yet they were transported uphill and placed with remarkable accuracy along a rising axis that extends from the plains toward the mountain sanctuary. Unlike later Khmer centers, where canal systems may have facilitated movement, Vat Fu's earlier phases show relatively limited evidence of large-scale hydraulic transport infrastructure. This suggests that the builders relied on alternative methods, perhaps combinations of sledges, rollers, and human labor. Yet the precision of final placement implies a level of control and coordination that is difficult to reconcile with such basic means alone. Even minor errors in positioning would have been amplified across the long axial layout of the site, yet surveys show that alignment remains strikingly consistent over distances of more than 1 kilometer. Archaeological excavations conducted in the late 20th century further revealed that the precision observed above ground extends into the foundations. Subsurface investigations uncovered carefully prepared base layers composed of compacted earth, sand, and smaller stone fragments arranged to distribute weight evenly and prevent subsidence. In some areas, these layers function similarly to modern load distribution systems, reducing stress concentrations and enhancing structural stability over time. The fact that many of these foundation systems have remained intact for over 1,000 years despite exposure to monsoon rains, ground movement, and vegetation growth suggests that the builders possessed not only practical experience, but also a sophisticated understanding of soil mechanics and drainage behavior. Yet again, no written records have been found that explain how such knowledge was developed or transmitted. Taken together, the evidence from Vat Fu reveals a level of technical mastery that is still difficult to explain using known ancient technologies. The precision of stone cutting, tight joints without mortar, and controlled carving all point to a deep understanding of materials and geometry. Whether this was the result of long-term innovation or a lost body of knowledge remains unclear. What is certain is that Vat Fu challenges the idea that ancient construction was primitive, showing instead a level of precision that even modern technology can struggle to replicate. In your opinion, is the near modern level precision of stone processing at Vat Fu the result of craftsmanship refined over generations, or evidence of a lost technology? Hidden beneath the dense canopy of the Petén rainforest, the ancient Maya city of Yaksha stands as one of the most enigmatic archaeological sites in Mesoamerica, not because of its size alone, though it encompasses more than 500 mapped structures, but because of a level of construction precision that appears to go far beyond what was functionally required. Located roughly 30 kilometers southeast of Tikal, Yaksha was first documented in the early 20th century, with major excavation campaigns beginning in the 1970s under the direction of the Guatemalan Institute of Anthropology and History, later joined by German and other European archaeological teams throughout the 1990s and early 2010s. These investigations revealed a city flourishing between approximately 300 and 900 CE, complete with ceremonial plazas, pyramidal temples rising over 30 meters, elevated causeways, and an advanced water management system. Yet among all these achievements, one feature consistently drew the attention of researchers: the extraordinary precision in stoneworking and stucco application, a technological signature that remains only partially explained. At multiple excavation zones, particularly within the North Acropolis, the East Plaza complexes, and several palace platforms, archaeologists documented limestone blocks that had been cut, shaped, and assembled with a degree of accuracy rarely associated with societies lacking metal tools. Measurements taken during restoration efforts indicate that many joints between stones exhibit gaps of less than 2 to 3 millimeters, even after more than 1,000 years of exposure to humidity, root penetration, and seasonal flooding. This is not isolated craftsmanship. It appears systematically across different construction phases, suggesting standardized techniques rather than occasional excellence. In some cases, entire wall faces were leveled so precisely that deviations across several meters remain within a few millimeters, creating surfaces capable of reflecting light evenly, an aesthetic refinement that exceeds mere structural necessity. This raises a critical question: how was such precision achieved with the known technological limitations of the Maya? The archaeological record confirms that they did not use iron or steel tools. Instead, they relied on materials such as obsidian, chert, and other hard stones. Experimental archaeology has shown that shaping limestone with such tools is possible, but extremely time-intensive, especially when attempting to maintain consistent flatness and angular precision across large surfaces. One proposed method involves abrasion using sand and water, effectively turning the process into a controlled grinding technique. However, even under controlled modern experiments, replicating the uniformity observed at Yaksha requires not only time, but a high degree of process control, suggesting that the Maya possessed a refined understanding of material behavior and surface finishing that is still not fully reconstructed. Even more perplexing is the application of stucco, a lime-based plaster that coats many of Yaksa's structures with a smooth, durable finish. Chemical analysis of stucco samples taken during excavations in the late 20th century reveals a complex composition involving finely calcined lime mixed with organic binders, possibly derived from plant extracts or resins. Producing lime of this quality requires heating limestone to temperatures exceeding 600 to 800 degrees Celsius, maintaining that heat for extended periods, and then carefully slaking and mixing the resulting quicklime. In the humid, fuel-limited environment of the rainforest, achieving such thermal control would have required sophisticated kiln designs and resource management strategies that are not yet fully understood. The durability of this stucco is equally remarkable. Despite more than a millennium of exposure to intense rainfall, biological growth, and chemical weathering, significant portions remain intact, adhering tightly to the underlying stone. In some protected areas, traces of pigments are still visible, indicating that the stucco also served as a base for painted surfaces. Compared to the hydraulic concrete of ancient Rome, often cited for its resilience in marine environments, Maya stucco represents a different but equally advanced solution optimized not for saltwater exposure, but for resistance to tropical decay. While Roman concrete incorporates volcanic ash to create long-term chemical stability, the Maya appear to have achieved durability through precise control of lime processing and organic additives, a formula that modern attempts have only partially replicated. What makes this even more intriguing is that such precision and material quality appear to exceed what is structurally necessary. A wall does not require sub-millimeter joints or mirror-like flatness to remain stable, especially when covered by thick plaster. Yet the builders of Yaksha consistently pursued this level of refinement. This suggests that the precision itself may have held cultural, symbolic, or functional significance beyond mere engineering. Some researchers have proposed that smoother surfaces improved water runoff during heavy rains, reducing erosion and biological growth. Others speculate that the reflective quality of polished stucco may have played a role in ritual or visual signaling, particularly under strong sunlight or moonlight. However, these interpretations remain hypotheses, lacking definitive evidence. When compared to other ancient sites, the anomaly becomes clearer. At Giza pyramids, the precision of limestone casing stones, often cited as having joints so tight that even a thin blade cannot pass between them, demonstrates a high level of craftsmanship. But within a dry desert environment that naturally preserves such work, at Stonehenge, massive stones were shaped and aligned with impressive skill. Yet, the emphasis lies more on placement and astronomical alignment than on fine surface finishing. Yaksha, by contrast, combines both precise geometry and refined surface treatment, maintained under some of the most challenging environmental conditions on Earth. This dual achievement, precision plus durability in a tropical ecosystem, has few direct parallels. Recent LiDAR surveys conducted across the Peten region have expanded our understanding of Yaksha's scale, revealing additional platforms, terraces, and interconnected causeways hidden beneath dense vegetation. These findings suggest that the construction techniques observed in excavated areas were not isolated, but part of a broader, city-wide system. If so, the level of labor organization, knowledge transmission, and quality control required becomes even more difficult to reconcile with traditional models of pre-industrial societies. It implies not only skilled artisans, but also a structured approach to training, standardization, and possibly even measurement systems that have left little to no direct archaeological trace. Ultimately, the stonework and stucco of Yaksha reveal a gap between what ancient builders achieved and what we can fully explain today. With no written records or tools left behind, archaeologists must infer techniques from the surviving structure's surfaces that remain remarkably smooth, precise, and durable after more than 1,000 years. These features suggest not just skilled craftsmanship, but a level of technological understanding that we may still underestimate. If you were an ancient engineer at Yaksha, what method would you use to achieve such near-perfect precision using only stone tools? Share your theory in the comments below. Hidden deep within the dense tropical forests of Sri Lanka, the ruins of Ritigala Monastery present a paradox that continues to challenge archaeologists, engineers, and historians alike. At first glance, Ritigala appears to be a modest monastic complex, believed to have flourished around the 1st century BCE during the reign of King Dutujemunu. But closer examination reveals a level of planning, precision, and environmental adaptation that seems disproportionate to its supposed technological context. Excavations conducted throughout the 20th century by the Department of Archaeology of Sri Lanka uncovered a network of stone-paved pathways, meditation platforms, reservoirs, and drainage systems distributed across a rugged, forested mountain rising over 600 meters above sea level. These features are not randomly arranged. Instead, they follow a deliberate spatial logic, with pathways maintaining consistent gradients, often estimated between 5 and 7 degrees, even across uneven terrain, suggesting careful surveying and planning. The stone slabs used in these pathways, in many cases measuring over 1 meter in length and weighing several hundred kilograms, were transported and positioned with remarkable stability, yet there is no evidence of wheeled transport systems or advanced lifting mechanisms typically associated with such feats. What makes Ritigala particularly enigmatic, however, is not merely its construction, but the almost complete absence of physical traces indicating how it was built. Unlike sites such as Petra, where chisel marks, quarry sites, and tool impressions clearly document the carving process, or even Machu Picchu, where experimental archaeology has demonstrated how stone tools and abrasion techniques could achieve tight-fitting masonry, Ritigala offers almost no such clues. The stone surfaces here are unusually smooth in certain sections, while in others they appear weathered yet still retain edges that suggest controlled shaping rather than natural fracturing. Archaeologists have noted the absence of consistent chisel striations or percussion marks that would typically be expected if iron or bronze tools had been used extensively. Even more puzzling is the lack of debris. No large concentrations of stone chips, no clearly defined quarry zones within the immediate vicinity, and no remnants of workshops that would normally accompany construction on this scale. This absence has led some researchers to question whether the shaping and fitting of stones occurred off-site, yet transporting pre-shaped stones through dense forest without leaving logistical traces introduces an entirely new set of unanswered questions. Comparative analysis further deepens the mystery. At Sigiriya, located not far from Ritigala, advanced hydraulic engineering and polished stonework are evident, but there, inscriptions, tool marks, and structural remains provide at least partial insight into the methods used. Similarly, at Angkor Wat, the sheer scale of construction is matched by abundant evidence of labor organization, quarrying, and transportation systems. Ritigala, by contrast, seems to achieve a comparable level of precision on a smaller scale, yet without leaving behind the fingerprints of the process. Measurements taken during surveys in the late 20th century indicate that some stone joints fit with gaps of less than a few millimeters, a level of precision that, while not unprecedented, typically correlates with clear evidence of iterative shaping and fitting evidence that is conspicuously absent here. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials found within the site including charcoal fragments associated with habitation layers, confirms occupation periods spanning from roughly the 1st century BCE to the early centuries CE, aligning with historical records of monastic activity, but these findings do little to clarify the technological means employed. One of the most compelling aspects of this enigma lies in the environmental context. Ritigala is situated in a region characterized by high humidity, heavy rainfall, and dense vegetation conditions that accelerate erosion and organic decay. While it is reasonable to assume that some evidence, particularly wooden tools or organic construction aids, may have decomposed over time, this does not fully account for the near-total absence of durable indicators, such as metal tool fragments or large-scale quarrying scars. In contrast, even in similarly harsh environments, other archaeological sites tend to preserve at least partial records of their construction processes. The deliberate integration of drainage channels and subtly inclined stone surfaces at Ritigala demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of water management, ensuring that rainwater is efficiently diverted away from pathways and structures. These channels are often carved with consistent depth and alignment, yet again, without the expected traces of cutting tools, raising the possibility that either the tools used were significantly different from those commonly assumed, or that techniques were employed that left minimal physical signatures. Several hypotheses have been proposed to address this absence. Some scholars suggest that highly refined stoneworking techniques using hardened stone tools combined with sand, abrasion, and water could produce smooth surfaces without leaving pronounced marks, though experimental attempts to replicate such results have achieved only partial success and often require far more time and labor than would seem practical for the scale observed. Others have speculated about the use of organic acids or plant-based compounds to weaken stone surfaces prior to shaping, a theory that remains largely untested and controversial. More speculative ideas, often outside mainstream archaeology, propose the existence of lost or undocumented technologies capable of altering stone properties, but these lack empirical support. What remains indisputable is that the conventional toolkit associated with the period primarily iron implements of relatively modest hardness does not fully explain the precision and finish seen in certain elements of the site. The mystery is compounded by the apparent intentionality behind the site's design. Ritigala was not a monumental urban center or a royal complex intended to display power. It was, by most accounts, a secluded monastic retreat emphasizing austerity and isolation. Yet, paradoxically, its construction reflects a level of effort and technical control that seems excessive for such a purpose. The layout enforces separation between individual meditation platforms connected by carefully regulated pathways that guide movement in a controlled manner, suggesting that the builders prioritize not only functionality but also experiential design. This raises an intriguing question. If the goal was simplicity and detachment, why employ such precise and labor-intensive construction methods, especially when simpler alternatives would have sufficed? Ultimately, Ritigala Monastery highlights the limits of modern archaeology. Although it is neither the largest nor the most prominent structure, it challenges the assumption that advanced technology must always leave clear traces. Here, the results endure stable pathways, precisely fitted stones, and efficient drainage systems, yet the process remains almost invisible. This raises the possibility that entire ancient techniques or bodies of knowledge have disappeared without a trace, leaving Ritigala as a mystery that remains unsolved. In your opinion, is the absence of tool evidence at Ritigala Monastery the result of lost ancient technology, or simply because modern science has not yet fully understood it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden within the dense, humid landscape of the Bujang Valley in Malaysia, Bukit Batu Pahhat stands as one of Southeast Asia's most quietly perplexing archaeological sites, an unassuming hill that conceals evidence of engineering choices that appear, at times, deeply out of place in their historical and geographical context. Discovered and systematically studied beginning in the early 20th century, particularly through excavations led by British archaeologists such as H.G. Quaritch Wales in the 1930s and later reinforced by Malaysian archaeological missions in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the site has yielded the remains of what is believed to be a Hindu-Buddhist temple complex, dating roughly between the 4th and 12th centuries. Yet beyond its religious identity, what continues to puzzle researchers is not what the structure represents, but how it was built. At the center of this mystery lies a decision that defies regional norms: the extensive use of granite. Across most of ancient Southeast Asia, monumental architecture from comparable periods relied overwhelmingly on materials that were easier to extract and shape: baked brick in the riverine plains of the Mekong, laterite blocks in Cambodia, or relatively soft sandstone as seen in the great temples of Angkor Wat. Even in Java, the vast mandala of Borobudur was constructed using volcanic andesite, a material significantly easier to carve than dense crystalline granite. Granite, by contrast, ranks high on the Mohs hardness scale, typically around 6 to 7, making it extraordinarily resistant to shaping, with the iron tools presumed to have been available in the region during the early first millennium. And yet, at Bukit Batu Pahhat, archaeologists have documented multiple structural elements, bases, platforms, and stepped foundations composed of granite blocks that exhibit a level of precision difficult to reconcile with these technological limitations. Detailed measurements taken during later surveys revealed that some of these granite blocks were cut and fitted with tolerances of just a few millimeters. The surfaces are not merely functional. They are flattened and aligned with a consistency that suggests deliberate calibration rather than approximate assembly. In several sections of the foundation, the joints between stones are so tight that even modern measuring tools struggle to detect significant gaps. This raises a critical question: what tools or techniques were used to achieve such results? While iron chisels and hammerstones have been proposed, experimental archaeology has repeatedly demonstrated the immense labor and time required to shape granite to such precision using only these implements. In known ancient contexts where granite was widely used, such as in South Indian temple architecture or Old Kingdom Egypt, there is clear evidence of advanced quarrying systems, specialized tools, and large labor forces. At Bukit Batu Pahhat, however, no such infrastructure has been definitively identified. Equally perplexing is the issue of sourcing and transportation. Geological surveys indicate that while granite does exist within the broader Kedah region, the extraction of large, uniform blocks would have required organized quarrying operation. Yet no quarry site directly associated with the temple has been conclusively located. If the stones were transported from even a few kilometers away, this would imply the movement of multi-ton blocks across terrain that, even today, is characterized by dense vegetation, soft ground, and seasonal flooding. Comparisons are often drawn to megalithic transport feats elsewhere: the movement of stones at Stonehenge over distances of more than 200 kilometers, or the hauling of granite blocks for Egyptian pyramids along the Nile. But in those cases, we possess clearer models of logistics, including river transport or prepared roadways. At Bukit Batu Pahhat, the absence of such evidence deepens the mystery rather than resolves it. Excavations conducted throughout the 20th century further revealed that the granite was not used randomly, but strategically, primarily in foundational elements that would bear the greatest structural load. Above these granite bases, other materials such as brick appear in later phases, suggesting a hybrid construction technique. This implies that the builders understood not only how to work with granite, but also when and why to use it. The foundation layers themselves exhibit signs of careful engineering. Stones are arranged in interlocking patterns, sometimes with slight variations in thickness that may have been intended to distribute weight more evenly across unstable, waterlogged soil. In a tropical environment where erosion, subsidence, and vegetation growth can rapidly destabilize structures, this level of foresight suggests a sophisticated understanding of both materials and local geology. Radiocarbon dating of associated organic materials and stylistic analysis of artifacts place the primary occupation of the site within a broad window spanning several centuries, during which the Bujang Valley functioned as an important trade hub connecting the Indian Ocean to the South China Sea. This has led some researchers to propose that the knowledge required to work granite may have been introduced through contact with Indian craftsmen, particularly from regions where granite temple construction was already established. However, this theory encounters its own limitations. The stylistic features of Bukit Batu Pahhat do not fully align with South Indian temple typologies, and there's no direct evidence, such as inscriptions or tool assemblages, that confirms the presence of foreign specialists on site. Instead, what emerges is a picture of selective adaptation, techniques that resemble external influences, yet are executed in a distinctly local manner. The question then is not simply whether the builders of Bukit Batu Pahhat had access to advanced knowledge, but how that knowledge was transmitted, transformed, and possibly lost. Unlike Angkor Wat or Borobudur, which evolved into large, state-sponsored architectural traditions with extensive documentation and continuity, the structures of the Bujang Valley appear more fragmented, both physically and historically. Many were abandoned, dismantled, or buried over time, and systematic archaeological work only began relatively recently. As a result, the technological narrative of the site is incomplete, reconstructed from scattered remains rather than continuous records. Modern analytical techniques, such as petrographic analysis of stone surfaces and microwear studies, have begun to offer new insights, suggesting the possible use of abrasive materials like quartz sand in combination with metal tools to achieve smoother finishes. Yet, even these explanations do not fully account for the uniformity and efficiency implied by the surviving structures. If such techniques were indeed employed, they would represent a level of material science that is rarely attributed to early Southeast Asian societies in conventional historical models. In the end, Bukit Batu Pahhat stands as a subtle yet powerful challenge to our understanding of ancient engineering. Though smaller than sites like Egypt or Angkor Wat, its unexpected use of advanced techniques raises questions that remain unanswered. Whether it reflects lost knowledge, underestimated local skill, or gaps in modern research, the site continues to be an enduring mystery in human technological history. So what do you think the granite construction techniques at Bukit Batu Pahhat are evidence of a lost ancient technology, or simply something modern science has yet to fully understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden deep within the dense tropical forests of northern Guatemala, far from the monumental skyline of better-known cities like Tikal, the relatively modest site of La Corona has emerged as one of the most intellectually provocative archaeological discoveries of the Maya world. First systematically documented in the early 2000s after decades of looting had already exposed fragments of its carved panels to the black market, La Corona quickly drew attention not for towering pyramids or vast urban sprawl, but for something far more unsettling: an extraordinary collection of hieroglyphic inscriptions executed with a level of precision that appears disproportionate to both the site's size and the technological toolkit available to its inhabitants. Excavations led by researchers such as Marcello Canuto and Tomas Barrientos between 2005 and 2013 uncovered more than a dozen intricately carved limestone panels, many of them forming what scholars now call a hieroglyphic staircase or narrative sequence that records political alliances, royal visits, and dynastic propaganda linked closely to the powerful kingdom of Calakmul. Yet, beyond their historical content, these panels raise a far deeper and more difficult question. How are they made with such extraordinary consistency and refinement using what we believe were essentially stone-based tools? At first glance, limestone might seem like an easy medium. Compared to granite or basalt, it is relatively soft, typically measuring around 3 on the Mohs hardness scale, which should make carving straightforward with harder stones such as flint or obsidian. However, the reality observed at La Corona complicates this assumption. The glyph panels display not only clean incisions, but remarkably uniform line depths, smooth internal curves, and sharply defined corners that remain legible even after more than 1,300 years of exposure to humidity, biological growth, and seasonal erosion. In several panels documented during the 2012 excavation season, microscopic analysis revealed that individual carved lines maintain a consistent depth variation of less than 1 millimeter across entire glyph blocks, measuring up to 30 or 40 centimeters in width. This level of control suggests not merely skill, but a systematic method, one that allowed artisans to replicate precision across multiple panels and possibly across generations. When compared to other Maya sites of the late Classic period, such as Tikal or even Copan, a subtle but significant difference emerges. At Tikal, for instance, while stele inscriptions are undeniably sophisticated, they often exhibit slight irregularities in line thickness and occasional asymmetry in glyph proportions, consistent with hand carving using stone tools. At La Corona, by contrast, several panels appear almost standardized, as though guided by a template or measurement system that minimized human deviation. Even more striking is the apparent absence of tool chatter marks the tiny, repetitive surface imperfections typically left by hammering or chipping. Instead, many glyph surfaces appear smoothed prior to incision, as if the stone had been prepared through an additional polishing phase, possibly using fine abrasive materials such as quartz sand. Yet experimental archaeology has shown that achieving such uniform smoothing across large surfaces with primitive abrasives alone would require enormous time investment and careful technique, raising questions about labor organization and knowledge transmission within the community. The problem becomes even more intriguing when considering the tools themselves. The Maya did not possess iron or steel during this period, and while obsidian blades are capable of producing extremely sharp cuts, they are also brittle and prone to fracturing under repeated pressure. Replicating the continuous, flowing curves seen in La Corona's glyphs using obsidian would likely require frequent tool replacement and exceptional control to prevent breakage. Some researchers have proposed the use of composite tools, wooden handles, combined with stone inserts or indirect carving methods involving abrasion rather than direct incision. However, none of these hypotheses fully account for the observed consistency across multiple panels, especially when considering the scale of production. If each panel required hundreds of hours of meticulous work, the cumulative labor investment for the entire corpus would suggest a level of specialization and institutional support more typical of major capitals than of a secondary site like La Corona. Adding to the mystery is the contextual function of these inscriptions. The texts themselves are unusually dense, recording precise dates in the Maya long count calendar, diplomatic exchanges, and even ritual events tied to the geopolitical struggle between rival superpowers of the time. In one particularly well-preserved panel discovered in 2012, references to a visit by a Calakmul princess include exact calendrical notations that can be correlated with astronomical cycles, implying not only literacy but advanced timekeeping knowledge embedded within the carving process. This raises the possibility that the act of carving was not merely artistic but deeply scientific, requiring coordination between scribes, astronomers, and artisans. In such a system, precision would not be optional. It would be essential to ensure that symbolic, calendrical, and political information was transmitted accurately across generations. Comparative evidence from other ancient civilizations further highlights the peculiarity of La Corona. In ancient Egypt, for example, hieroglyphs carved into limestone temples, such as those at Luxor, often show clear stages of production: initial outlines, rough chiseling, and final smoothing, with visible tool marks that document the process. Similarly, in Mesopotamian clay tablets, cuneiform impressions vary slightly depending on the stylus angle and pressure. At La Corona, however, the production sequence is far less visible, almost as if the process itself has been erased from the final product. This absence of intermediate traces challenges modern assumptions about how such work should look when executed with non-metal tools. Archaeological campaigns over the past 2 decades have attempted to reconstruct the operational context of these carvings. Surveys conducted between 2008 and 2015 identified workshop areas near the main plaza, where fragments of unfinished stone blocks and debris suggest local production rather than importation. Yet, even these fragments do not clearly display the same level of refinement seen in the finished panels, leaving open the possibility that final carving stages occurred under highly controlled conditions or by a select group of master artisans. Radiocarbon dating of associated organic materials places the peak of activity between approximately 600 and 800 CE, aligning with the broader fluorescence of Maya civilization, but offering little direct insight into the technological processes themselves. In the end, La Corona presents a clear paradox. Despite relying only on stone tools and manual labor, the Maya were able to create glyphs of extremely high precision, nearly flawless surfaces, and a recording system that was both historical and scientific. This may suggest that we have underestimated their craftsmanship, or that important techniques have been lost over time. Either way, La Corona stands as evidence that challenges modern understanding of ancient technology. Do you think the near-perfect glyph precision at La Corona is the result of human skill pushed to its limits, or evidence of an ancient technology we have lost? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden beneath the dense rainforest canopy of southern Belize, the ancient Maya city of Lubantoun emerges not as the largest or most visually imposing site of its civilization, but as one of the most technically perplexing ever documented, a place where the very fundamentals of ancient construction appear to be quietly rewritten. First brought to wider academic attention in 1903 by British colonial administrator and archaeologist Thomas Gann, and later investigated through more systematic excavations led by researchers such as Norman Hammond in the 1970s, as well as collaborative teams associated with institutions like Harvard University, Lubantoun has consistently challenged conventional interpretations of Maya engineering. At the center of this mystery lies a single, striking feature that distinguishes it from nearly every other known Maya site: an almost complete absence of mortar in its construction, replaced instead by a method of dry stone masonry so precise that it continues to resist full explanation even in the context of modern experimental archaeology. Unlike the grand ceremonial centers of the Maya civilization, such as Tikal, where limestone blocks were routinely bonded using lime-based mortar and coated with plaster to create smooth, monumental surfaces, the builders of Lubantoun appear to have deliberately rejected this widely used technique. Instead, they constructed terraces, stepped pyramidal platforms, and structural walls using locally sourced sedimentary stones, carefully shaped and fitted together without any visible binding material. This is not an incidental or partial feature. It defines the architectural identity of the site. The stones are arranged with such precision that in many areas, the joints between them measure less than a few millimeters, a level of tolerance that rivals finely cut masonry in much later historical periods. Field measurements recorded during excavations have documented contact surfaces that remain tightly aligned even after more than 1,000 years of exposure to tropical rainfall, root intrusion, and gradual soil movement, suggesting that the stability of the structures relies entirely on the geometry and placement of the stones themselves. What makes this achievement particularly difficult to reconcile with established models of Maya technology is the apparent mismatch between the precision observed and the tools believed to have been available. The inhabitants of Lubantoun, like other Maya populations of the late Classic period, are not thought to have possessed metal tools made of iron or steel, relying instead on implements fashioned from stone, bone, and possibly hardwood. Yet the stones at Lubantoun display evidence of controlled shaping, including flattened faces, subtly beveled edges, and, in some cases, slightly concave or convex surfaces that allow adjacent blocks to interlock more effectively. This technique bears an undeniable resemblance to the polygonal masonry seen at Machu Picchu and other Andean sites, where massive stones are fitted together so precisely that even thin blades cannot be inserted between them. However, the comparison introduces a deeper paradox. The Inca worked primarily with harder materials, such as granite and andesite, and are believed to have used a combination of hammerstones, abrasion, and possibly more advanced organizational labor systems, whereas the builders of Lubantoun achieved comparable joint precision using softer, more fragile sedimentary rock, which is inherently more prone to chipping and irregular fracture. Experimental archaeology has attempted to replicate the mortarless construction techniques observed at Lubantoun using tools and materials consistent with those available to the ancient Maya, including stone hammers, abrasive sand, and water-assisted grinding. While these experiments have demonstrated that it is theoretically possible to produce tightly fitting stones without metal tools, the time required to achieve such precision for a single block can be extraordinarily high, often extending to many hours or even days of continuous labor. When extrapolated across the scale of an entire city comprising dozens of platforms and hundreds of meters of retaining walls, the labor investment becomes staggering, raising questions about the organization, workforce size, and construction timeline required. Some archaeologists have suggested that the process may have been optimized through standardized shaping techniques or the use of templates, while others have proposed that certain stones were selected and minimally modified to fit naturally into pre-existing gaps, reducing the need for extensive carving. Yet neither explanation fully accounts for the consistency of the results observed across different parts of the site. Further complicating the picture is the distinctive morphology of the stones themselves. Unlike the sharply angular blocks typical of many ancient constructions, the stones at Lubantoun often exhibit slightly rounded corners and irregular outlines, features that at first glance might suggest a lack of precision. However, Closer inspection reveals that these irregularities are not random, but appear to be intentionally incorporated into the design, allowing the stones to settle into stable configurations that distribute weight evenly across multiple contact points. In modern structural engineering, such an approach would be recognized as a means of enhancing stability by reducing stress concentrations and allowing for minor adjustments under load. Dry stone walls constructed using similar principles are known for their resilience and ability to absorb small movements without catastrophic failure. Yet, there is no direct evidence that the Maya possessed a formalized theoretical understanding of these principles, leading to the possibility that their methods were derived from empirical observation and long-term refinement rather than abstract calculation. Excavations conducted throughout the 20th century have also revealed variations in construction quality across different sectors of Lubantoun, suggesting that the site may have undergone multiple phases of development or that different groups of builders were involved. Some terraces display exceptionally tight joints and finely shaped stones, while others appear more roughly assembled, indicating either a chronological progression in technique or a division of labor based on skill level. Radiocarbon dating of associated organic materials places the primary occupation of the site between approximately 700 and 900 CE, a period marked by both cultural fluorescence and increasing instability within the Maya lowlands. This temporal context raises the intriguing possibility that Lubantoun represents either a late-stage innovation in construction methods or a localized tradition that developed independently of broader regional trends. The long-term durability of Lubantoun's mortarless structures adds another layer to the mystery. In a tropical environment characterized by heavy rainfall, high humidity, and aggressive vegetation growth, mortar typically serves as both a bonding agent and a protective barrier, helping to stabilize structures and prevent water infiltration. Without it, one might expect rapid deterioration, as water seeps into gaps, roots force stones apart, and repeated cycles of wetting and drying weaken the overall structure. Yet many of Lubantoun's walls remain remarkably intact, their stability maintained through the precise arrangement and interlocking of stones. This suggests that the builders not only understood how to achieve initial stability, but also how to ensure long-term resilience under challenging environmental conditions. Comparisons can be drawn to ancient dry stone constructions in regions such as the Mediterranean, where similar techniques have been used for thousands of years. But those traditions are typically embedded within continuous cultural lineages, whereas Lubantoun appears as an outlier within the Maya world, lacking clear antecedents or direct successors. The question of how the stones were shaped with such consistency remains unresolved. Microscopic analysis of tool marks has indicated patterns consistent with abrasion rather than direct cutting, implying that surfaces may have been gradually ground into shape using sand or other abrasive materials. However, the uniformity of the finished surfaces suggests a level of control that is difficult to achieve through purely manual methods. Some researchers have speculated about the use of water-assisted grinding techniques, where the combination of moisture and abrasive particles could accelerate the smoothing process, while others have explored the possibility of thermal or chemical treatments that might have altered the properties of the stone to make it easier to work. These hypotheses remain largely speculative, as no definitive evidence has been found to confirm their use at Lubantoun. If you were a builder at Lubantoun more than 1,000 years ago, how would you explain creating perfectly fitted stone blocks without using mortar? Share your theory in the comments below. Deep within the dense forests of northern Cambodia, far beyond the well-documented heart of Angkor, lies Priya of Kampong Sve, a sprawling and largely isolated complex that continues to challenge conventional understanding of the technological and intellectual capabilities of the Khmer Empire. Covering an area of more than 25 square kilometers, with massive enclosing walls and moats reaching widths of up to 100 meters, the site rivals the scale of Angkor Thom itself, yet it exists in a region that historical records barely mention in detail. French explorers first documented the ruins in the late 19th century, but it was not until the 20th and early 21st centuries, through surveys conducted by institutions such as the École Française d'Extrême Orient and later remote sensing studies using LiDAR, that the true extent of the complex began to emerge. What these investigations revealed was not merely a remote temple, but a highly organized urban and ceremonial landscape whose layout suggests a level of planning that appears strikingly systematic, even mathematical in nature. Among the many enigmas surrounding Priya Khan of Kampong Svai, one of the most compelling and least fully explained is its architectural orientation and the possibility that it encodes sophisticated astronomical knowledge. Several of the principal structures within the complex are aligned along a near-perfect east-west axis, with deviations measured at only a few degrees at most. This precision becomes even more intriguing when compared to other monumental sites across the ancient world. At Angkor Wat, for example, the main temple is famously oriented slightly west of true west, a deviation often interpreted as symbolic or cosmological, possibly linked to funerary associations or solar cycles. Similarly, at Machu Picchu, key structures are aligned with solstitial, sunrise, and sunset points, while the Giza pyramids exhibit an extraordinary cardinal alignment with an error margin of less than 0.05 degrees. In this global context, the orientation of Priya Khan appears neither accidental nor merely aesthetic. It suggests intentionality, yet the methods used to achieve such precision remain unclear. Field surveys conducted during the late 20th century identified that certain causeways and central axes of Priya Khan correspond closely to the rising position of the sun during equinoxes, when day and night are of equal length. Measurements indicate that the primary east-west axis deviates from true east by only a small margin, often less than 2 degrees, raising the possibility that Khmer architects were not only aware of solar movements, but capable of integrating them into large-scale urban design. More recent LiDAR mapping has reinforced this hypothesis, revealing hidden alignments between outer enclosures, reservoirs, and internal sanctuaries that form a coherent geometric pattern extending across several kilometers. These findings echo similar discoveries at Angkor, where archaeologists have identified vast, interconnected water management systems and urban grids that align with cardinal directions. However, what distinguishes Priya Khan is its relative isolation. Unlike Angkor, it was not the continuous political and economic center of the empire, yet it exhibits a level of planning sophistication that suggests centralized knowledge or a highly trained cadre of specialists operating far from the imperial core. The question, then, is not simply whether Priya Khan was aligned with astronomical phenomena, but how such alignment was achieved. Without modern instruments, no compasses, no theodolites, no satellite data, the Khmer builders would have relied on observational astronomy, using the sun's position on the horizon, shadows cast by gnomons, or possibly stellar references to establish cardinal directions. Yet, even with these methods, achieving consistent accuracy across a site spanning tens of square kilometers would have required repeated measurements, standardized procedures, and a deep understanding of celestial cycles. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that simple tools can approximate cardinal directions, but the margin of error typically increases with scale. The fact that Priya Khan maintains relatively tight alignment over such a vast area suggests either an unusually high level of precision in these methods or the existence of techniques that have not been fully reconstructed. Adding to the mystery is the integration of this orientation with the site's hydraulic infrastructure. The large Beret rectangular reservoirs measuring several kilometers in length are themselves aligned in ways that appear to reinforce the overall directional scheme. In Angkor, scholars such as Bernard-Philippe Groslier argued that the water system functioned not only for irrigation, but also as a symbolic representation of the cosmic ocean surrounding Mount Meru in Hindu cosmology. If a similar symbolic framework applies to Priya Khan, then its orientation may reflect not just practical or observational considerations, but a deliberate attempt to embed cosmological order into the landscape itself. This raises the possibility that the site functioned as a kind of terrestrial map of the heavens, where architecture, water, and celestial cycles were interwoven into a unified system of meaning. Despite these insights, critical gaps remain. Archaeological excavations have uncovered relatively few instruments or artifacts that could be directly linked to surveying or astronomical measurement. Unlike later civilizations that left behind detailed treatises on geometry or astronomy, the Khmer Empire's written records, primarily inscriptions, focus on religious and political matters, offering little technical explanation. This absence of evidence has led some researchers to propose that knowledge was transmitted orally or through specialized guilds, whose techniques were never recorded in durable form. Others suggest that we may be underestimating the capabilities of so-called simple tools, and that a combination of empirical observation and iterative refinement could achieve higher precision than previously assumed. Comparisons with other ancient cultures further complicate the picture. The builders of the Giza pyramids, for instance, may have used circumpolar stars to establish true north, while Inca engineers at Machu Picchu appear to have combined horizon observations with landscape features to track solar events. In Mesoamerica, structures at sites like Chichen Itza are aligned to produce dramatic light and shadow effects during equinoxes, suggesting an advanced understanding of solar geometry. In each case, the underlying principle is the same: careful observation of the sky translated into architectural form. Yet the specific techniques differ, shaped by local environments, cultural priorities, and available materials. Priya Khan of Kampong Svai fits within this broader tradition, but its scale and context make it uniquely puzzling, especially given its distance from the main centers of Khmer power. Ultimately, the orientation of Priya Khan of Kampong Svai suggests more than technical skill. It reflects a worldview where science, religion, and art were deeply connected. Its precise alignments, integrated water systems, and links to celestial cycles point to a level of knowledge that modern archaeology is still struggling to fully understand. Despite extensive research, one question remains: how did an ancient civilization, without modern tools, achieve such scale and accuracy? Until answered, the site stands as a silent testament to a lost and still unexplained technology of knowledge. In your opinion, what methods did the ancient Khmer use to align such massive structures with astronomical phenomena so precisely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden deep within the dense tropical forests of Campeche, Mexico, Riobeck ruins stands as one of the most perplexing archaeological landscapes of the ancient Maya world. Less a city in the traditional sense and more a scattered constellation of elite compounds, each crowned with structures that appear familiar at first glance, yet become increasingly illogical the closer they are examined. First documented in the early 20th century and later investigated in detail by French archaeological missions led by scholars such as Maurice Gendrop and Dominique Michelet, Riobeck has resisted conventional interpretation for decades. largely because its architecture defies the functional norms observed at major Maya centers like Tikal or Calakmul. Excavations conducted between the 1970s and 2010s revealed that many of its most iconic features, the twin tower structures resembling steep pyramids, are in fact false temples, with stairways too steep to climb, doorways that lead nowhere, and upper chambers that cannot be accessed from any practical route. These constructions required the transport and placement of thousands of limestone blocks, some weighing several hundred kilograms, yet they appear to have been built not for ritual use, habitation, or defense, but for visual or symbolic effect, raising immediate questions about the underlying logic driving such labor-intensive design. What makes Riobeck particularly enigmatic, however, is not merely its deceptive architecture, but the level of technical refinement achieved in its construction, especially when examined alongside the near-total absence of corresponding tool evidence across multiple excavation campaigns, including the extensive Riobeck Archaeological project initiated in 2002. Researchers documented walls coated in finely prepared stucco layers with remarkably consistent thickness, often within a margin of just a few millimeters, as well as decorative facades featuring intricate geometric and zoomorphic motifs aligned with near-perfect symmetry. In some structures, the precision of stone-fitting rivals that's seen in better-known sites such as Palenque, where elite craftsmanship is typically associated with ceremonial cores and royal tombs. Yet, at Riobeck, this level of detail appears even on elevated or partially obscured surfaces, areas that would have been invisible to observers at ground level, suggesting that the builders adhered to standards that exceeded any apparent functional or aesthetic necessity. Such choices challenge modern assumptions about efficiency and purpose in ancient engineering, hinting instead at a system of values or beliefs that prioritized perfection beyond human visibility. The paradox deepens when considering the technological limitations of the Maya civilization during the late Classic period, roughly between 600 and 900 CE. Unlike contemporaneous societies in Eurasia, the Maya did not possess iron or steel tools, relying instead on implements made from harder stones such as obsidian and chert. While experimental archaeology has demonstrated that these materials can, under controlled conditions, shape limestone with reasonable accuracy, reproducing the ultrafine detailing and consistent finishes observed at Riobeck would require not only exceptional skill, but also a highly organized production process. However, despite decades of excavation, archaeologists have uncovered remarkably few traces of such processes. There are no clearly defined workshops, no large concentrations of discarded tool fragments, and no stratified debris fields that would typically indicate sustained construction activity on the scale implied by the architecture. Even microware analysis of recovered tools has failed to conclusively link them to the kind of precision carving evident on Riobeck's facades, leaving a critical gap between the visible results and the inferred methods. Comparative data further complicates the picture. At Copan, for instance, detailed studies of sculptural workshops have revealed clusters of unfinished monuments, tool marks, and production waste that collectively map out the chaîne opératoire, the full sequence of artistic production from quarry to final installation. Similarly, at Uxmal, the Puig-style architecture exhibits clear evidence of standardized stone modules and construction staging areas, allowing researchers to reconstruct the logistical framework behind its ornate mosaics. Riobeck, by contrast, offers no such transparency. Its buildings appear complete and deliberate, yet the infrastructural footprint of their creation is conspicuously missing, as though the processes themselves have been erased or were conducted in a manner that left minimal archaeological trace. Radiocarbon dating and ceramic analysis suggest that the site reached its peak between approximately 700 and 850 CE, a relatively narrow window for the development and execution of such a distinctive architectural style, further intensifying the mystery of how these techniques emerged, matured, and then seemingly vanished without clear evolutionary precursors or successors. One possible explanation is that the construction methods employed at Riobeck relied heavily on perishable materials, wooden scaffolding, organic polishing agents, or plant-based binding compounds that have long since decomposed in the humid tropical environment. Yet, even this hypothesis struggles to account for the absence of indirect indicators, such as post holes, soil discolorations, or chemical residues, which are often detectable even when the original materials have decayed. Another line of inquiry considers the possibility of highly specialized, perhaps even itinerant, artisan groups whose knowledge was closely guarded and not widely disseminated. If such groups existed, they may have operated within elite-controlled compounds, leaving behind limited and spatially restricted evidence that has yet to be fully identified. Still, this does not fully resolve the issue of scale. The number of refined structures at Riobeck implies a sustained and coordinated effort over multiple generations, something that would typically produce a more substantial archaeological signature. Adding to the enigma is the spatial organization of the site itself. Unlike the centralized urban layouts of Tikal or Calakmul, where monumental architecture is concentrated around large plazas and clearly defined ceremonial axes, Riobeck's structures are dispersed across the landscape, often separated by hundreds of meters of dense vegetation. LiDAR surveys conducted in the early 21st century have revealed a network of low platforms, terraces, and causeways connecting these compounds, suggesting a form of settlement that blends residential, ceremonial, and symbolic functions in ways that do not align neatly with established models of Maya urbanism. This dispersed pattern complicates efforts to identify centralized production zones or administrative hubs that might have coordinated large-scale construction, reinforcing the impression of a society operating under a different set of organizational principles. Ultimately, the most unsettling aspect of Riobeck is not simply that we lack answers, but that the available evidence seems to resist integration into any coherent explanatory framework. The site demonstrates a level of architectural ambition and technical execution that clearly required planning, knowledge, and labor. Yet the conventional markers of these elements, tools, workshops, waste, and step-by-step developmental traces are either absent or insufficient. It is as if we are observing the final output of a complex technological system while being denied access to its underlying mechanisms. For modern researchers trained to reconstruct the past through material evidence, this creates a profound interpretive tension. How do you explain a process that has left almost no trace of itself? Do you think the complete absence of tool evidence at Riobeck is simply due to time erasing it? Or could it point to a hidden construction method we still don't understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Hidden deep within the dense tropical forests of northern Cambodia, far removed from the monumental grandeur of Angkor Wat, the forgotten capital of Koker emerges as one of the most perplexing archaeological enigmas of the Khmer Empire. Established in the early 10th century under the rule of Jayavarman IV, Koker functioned as the imperial center for barely 2 decades, yet within that astonishingly short time frame, more than 180 monumental structures were erected across an area exceeding 80 square kilometers. At the heart of this vast complex stands Prasat Tom, a 7-tiered pyramid rising approximately 36 meters above the jungle canopy, constructed from massive sandstone blocks whose origin, transport, and placement continue to challenge modern engineering assumptions. while its geometric form alone raises questions. It is the logistics behind the movement of these colossal stones that has become the most enduring and unresolved mystery. Archaeological investigations began in earnest during the early 20th century when scholars from the École Française d'Extrême-Orient conducted initial surveys and documentation. These early expeditions identified the unusual density and scale of stone architecture, but lacked the technological means to fully map the site. It was not until the 2010s, with the application of airborne LiDAR scanning, that researchers uncovered the full extent of Koker's urban network, revealing hidden roadways, reservoirs, and previously unknown temple structures beneath the forest canopy. Yet, even with these advances, one critical element remains conspicuously absent: a clear, continuous transport system capable of moving multi-ton stone blocks from quarry to construction site. Estimates based on structural analysis suggest that many of the sandstone blocks used at Koker weigh between several hundred kilograms and up to 2 or 3 tons, with certain foundational elements possibly exceeding 5 tons. The nearest known quarries are located several kilometers away, implying the need for a highly organized transport operation. However, unlike Angkor, where extensive canal systems connected quarries such as Phnom Kulen to temple sites via waterways, Koker presents no comparable hydraulic infrastructure of sufficient scale. Ground surveys have failed to identify large canals, permanent roads, or reinforced pathways that would typically accompany such logistical undertakings. This absence is not a minor gap. It is a fundamental contradiction between the scale of construction and the visible means of execution. To better grasp the magnitude of this problem, comparisons with other ancient civilizations are unavoidable. At the Pyramid of Giza, dating to around 2600 BCE, archaeological evidence includes quarry remains, worker settlements, ramp systems, and even papyrus documents, such as the Diary of Merer, which detail the transportation of limestone blocks along the Nile. Experimental reconstructions have demonstrated that teams of workers could move stones weighing several tons using wooden sledges over wetted sand, significantly reducing friction. Similarly, at Stonehenge, stones weighing up to 25 tons were transported over distances of more than 200 kilometers using a combination of river transport and overland hauling, supported by archaeological traces of routes and staging points. In both cases, while the exact methods are still debated, there exists a coherent body of physical and documentary evidence linking quarry, transport, and construction. Koker, in stark contrast, offers no such continuity. The terrain itself complicates every proposed solution. Dense jungle vegetation, uneven ground, and seasonal monsoon conditions would have made large-scale overland transport extraordinarily difficult. Some researchers have suggested that temporary wooden tracks or log rollers may have been employed, yet no remnants of such systems have been preserved, an absence that is particularly striking given the otherwise rich archaeological footprint of the site. Others have hypothesized that seasonal flooding might have been exploited to float stones closer to the construction area, but topographical studies indicate that the natural waterways in the region lack the depth and connectivity required for transporting multi-ton loads over several kilometers. Equally perplexing is the precision with which these stones were shaped and assembled once they reached their destination. Many blocks exhibit flat, finely finished surfaces and sharp angles, allowing them to fit together without mortar and joints so tight that even a thin blade cannot penetrate them. This level of craftsmanship suggests not only advanced stoneworking techniques, but also a high degree of planning, as each block would need to be cut to exact specifications before transport. The implication is clear. Any error in measurement or execution would have been magnified during assembly, yet the surviving structures show remarkable consistency. The time constraint further intensifies the mystery. Historical records indicate that Koker served as the Khmer capital for roughly 20 years before the political center shifted back toward Angkor. Within this brief period, the construction of hundreds of large-scale stone structures would have required an enormous labor force operating with exceptional coordination. If we assume, conservatively, that even a single multi-ton block required dozens of workers to move in position, the total human effort involved becomes staggering. Yet, unlike Giza, where worker villages and logistical infrastructure have been clearly identified, Koker has yielded comparatively little evidence of such large, permanent support systems. One of the most striking examples of extreme stone use at the site is the massive base that once supported a colossal linga, a sacred symbol in Khmer Shaivite worship. This base alone would have required the precise placement of enormous stone blocks, each carefully aligned to support both structural weight and ritual function. The presence of a sophisticated drainage system integrated into this structure further indicates an advanced understanding of hydraulics, suggesting that the builders were not merely moving stones, but orchestrating complex engineering solutions. Modern investigations, including those supported by UNESCO following Koker's recognition as a World Heritage Site, continue to employ technologies such as 3D scanning, ground-penetrating radar, and geospatial analysis. These methods have refined our understanding of construction sequences and spatial organization, yet they have not resolved the central question of transport. Instead, they have revealed even greater levels of complexity, including subtle alignments and construction patterns that imply deliberate design choices rather than improvised methods. In the end, Koker remains a paradox, a site with engineering ambition comparable to the greatest ancient wonders, yet almost no evidence explaining how it was built. Unlike Egypt or Stonehenge, where construction methods leave clear traces, Koker reveals only the result, while the process remains unknown. And the question still stands: how could a 10th century civilization transport and assemble massive stone blocks with such precision, leaving almost no trace behind? How do you think the ancient builders of Koker transported those massive stone blocks using practical methods that have been lost to time, or a technology we still don't fully understand? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Rising from the fertile plains near Yogyakarta, the vast and enigmatic Prambanan temple compounds has long been celebrated as one of Southeast Asia's most magnificent Hindu architectural achievements. Yet, beneath its towering spires lies a deeper, far more unsettling mystery, one that challenges not only our understanding of ancient religion, but of ancient engineering itself. Built around the 9th century during the height of the Mataram Kingdom, Prambanan is often described as a ceremonial complex dedicated to the Trimurti, Shiva, Vishnu, and Brahma, but archaeological investigations conducted throughout the 20th and early 21st centuries have revealed that what we see today is only the surface layer of a far more complex, multi-phase construction system, including buried structural remains, artificially compacted foundations, and subtle yet highly advanced engineering decisions that appear far beyond what conventional historical models would predict. Excavations carried out by Dutch archaeologists in the early 1900s, followed by Indonesian restoration campaigns beginning in the 1950s and continuing after the devastating 2006 earthquake, uncovered multiple construction layers beneath the visible temple platforms, suggesting that earlier structures were either intentionally buried or catastrophically covered, possibly due to seismic activity linked to the nearby Mount Merapi, one of the most active volcanoes in the world. Yet, even more astonishing than the hidden layers is the extraordinary precision with which the visible temple itself was constructed, particularly in the shaping and placement of andesite stone, a dense volcanic rock known for its hardness and resistance, which would have posed immense challenges to any pre-industrial society. The andesite blocks used at Prominanon were not merely stacked or roughly shaped. They were cut, dressed, and fitted with a level of accuracy that rivals, and in some cases appears to exceed, that of other globally recognized megalithic sites. Individual stones, some weighing several hundred kilograms, were carved so precisely that they interlock without the use of mortar, forming tight joints that remain stable even after more than 1,000 years of exposure to tropical weather, seismic stress, and biological erosion. Modern measurements conducted during restoration phases have shown that in certain sections, the gaps between stones are less than 1 millimeter, an astonishing figure when compared to typical pre-modern masonry, where tolerances of several millimeters or even centimeters were considered acceptable. This degree of precision invites immediate comparison with sites such as Machu Picchu in the Andes, where Inca builders achieved famously tight stone fits without mortar, or Angkor Wat, where sandstone blocks were shaped with remarkable consistency. Yet there is a crucial difference. While Machu Picchu's granite can be fractured along natural lines, and Angkor sandstone is relatively softer and easier to carve, andesite is significantly harder, often requiring modern steel tools or diamond-tipped equipment to shape with high precision. This raises an unavoidable question. What tools and techniques were available to the builders of Prominanon that allowed them to achieve such results? Archaeological records provide only partial answers. Excavations have yielded basic iron tools, chisels, and hammerstones, but none that appear sufficient to explain the uniformity and smoothness of the stone surfaces, nor the intricate bas-reliefs that depict scenes from the Ramayana epic with astonishing clarity and depth. Some carvings feature fine lines and delicate contours that would be difficult to reproduce even with modern hand tools, suggesting either a level of craftsmanship far exceeding expectations or the use of techniques that have not survived in the archaeological record. Furthermore, the stones are not only precisely cut but also systematically organized using a form of interlocking geometry where protrusions and indentations act as natural locks, stabilizing the structure without adhesives. This technique, sometimes referred to as dry masonry interlock, is known in other ancient cultures, but at Prominanon it appears to have been applied with exceptional consistency across a massive architectural scale involving hundreds of thousands of individual blocks. Adding to the mystery is the apparent standardization of stone dimensions and shapes. Surveys conducted during the late 20th century indicated that many blocks conform to proportional ratios, suggesting the use of a measurement system or modular planning approach. While ancient Javanese units of measurement are known from inscriptions, the precision observed at Prominanon implies a level of calibration that would have required reliable measuring tools and repeatable production methods. In modern construction, such consistency is achieved through standardized units and precision instruments. Yet no such devices have been definitively identified at the site. The implication is that the builders possessed either highly refined manual techniques or a now lost system of measurement capable of maintaining accuracy across large-scale projects. The engineering sophistication extends beyond the stones themselves to the way they were transported and assembled. Andesite is not locally abundant in the immediate construction area, meaning that large quantities had to be quarried and moved, likely over several kilometers. Estimates suggest that the total volume of stone used in the complex reaches into the hundreds of thousands of cubic meters, representing a logistical challenge comparable to that of other major ancient monuments. Yet, unlike the pyramids of Giza and Acropolis, where relatively straight ramps and large labor forces could explain the movement of limestone blocks, Prominon's construction would have required navigating uneven volcanic terrain, seasonal rainfall, and potentially unstable ground conditions. No definitive evidence of transport infrastructure such as roads, rollers, or large-scale ramp systems has been found, leaving researchers to speculate on the methods employed. Equally compelling is how this precision stonework contributes to the temple's resilience. The interlocking andesite blocks allow for slight movement during seismic events, effectively dissipating energy rather than concentrating stress, a principle that mirrors modern earthquake-resistant design. This feature was dramatically demonstrated during the 2006 Yogyakarta earthquake, which caused significant damage to parts of the complex but did not result in total structural collapse. Instead, many sections remained intact, suggesting that the original builders may have intentionally designed for flexibility, a remarkable insight in a region known for frequent seismic activity. When combined with the hidden drainage systems embedded within the foundation layers, which channel water away from the structure and prevent erosion, the overall design begins to resemble an integrated engineering system rather than a purely religious or symbolic construction. Despite more than a century of research, including major restoration efforts, the technological sophistication of Prambanan remains only partially understood. Key questions persist. How did ancient builders achieve such precise stone cutting, maintain consistency on a massive scale, and why are traces of their tools almost entirely absent? Comparisons with other ancient sites provide context, but not answers. In the end, the andesite stones themselves, perfectly fitted and enduring over time, remain the clearest evidence of a level of engineering that modern science has yet to fully explain. In your opinion, what technology did ancient builders use to shape andesite stone with such near-perfect precision? Was it simply extraordinary craftsmanship or a lost form of advanced technology? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Deep within the humid lowland forests of southwestern Guatemala lies Takalik Abage, a site that, at first glance, appears to be just another ancient Mesoamerican ceremonial center, but as excavations over the past decades have revealed, it may in fact represent one of the most puzzling technological anomalies of the ancient world. First systematically investigated in the 20th century, with major archaeological campaigns led by scholars such as Susanna Miles in the 1940s, and later extensive excavations by the Guatemalan Institute of Anthropology and History, IDEH, beginning in the 1970s, Takalik Abage has yielded over 300 monuments, including altars, stelae, and sculptural fragments, many of which are carved from extremely hard volcanic stones such as basalt and andesite. These materials, with Mohs hardness values typically ranging between 6 and 7, present a formidable challenge even for modern stoneworkers using steel tools. Yet the artisans of Takalik Abage, operating more than 2,500 years ago and presumed to have relied primarily on stone, bone, and obsidian implements, achieved a level of precision and surface refinement that appears strikingly disproportionate to their technological toolkit. What immediately distinguishes Takalik Abage is not merely the presence of carved monuments, but the manner in which they were executed. Numerous basalt sculptures, some weighing several tons, display surfaces that are not only smoothed but polished to an almost uniform finish, with minimal irregularities across large planar areas. In several cases, microscopic analysis conducted during late 20th century conservation studies revealed abrasion patterns consistent with prolonged and controlled polishing processes, yet conspicuously lacking the deep, repetitive chisel marks typically associated with stone carving using primitive tools. This absence of clear tool signatures has become one of the central enigmas of the site. For example, Monument 1 and Monument 5, often associated stylistically with the Olmec tradition, exhibit rounded contours and symmetrical proportions that suggest a high degree of planning and measurement. The curvature of facial features, particularly in Olmec-style heads found at the site, maintains a consistency that implies the use of templates or geometric guidelines, yet no such instruments have been recovered from the archaeological record. When compared to major Olmec centers such as San Lorenzo, Tenochtitlan, and La Venta, Takalik Abage presents a paradox. The colossal heads of San Lorenzo, dating to approximately 1200 to 900 BCE, are widely regarded as masterpieces of early Mesoamerican sculpture, carved from basalt, transported over distances exceeding 60 kilometers. However, while those monuments often retain visible pecking marks and tool impressions evidence of labor-intensive shaping techniques, the sculptures at Takalik Abage, particularly those dated to later transitional phases around 800 to 400 BCE, appear more refined in certain aspects, with smoother transitions between planes and fewer visible traces of intermediate carving stages. This raises a critical question. Did the craftsmen of Takalik Abage inherit and refine Olmec techniques to an unprecedented degree, or were they employing methods that have since been lost or remain unrecognized? Further complicating the picture is the geological context. Unlike the Olmec heartland, where basalt sources are relatively accessible, Takalik Abage is situated in a region where suitable volcanic stone is not always immediately available on site, implying either the transportation of raw materials over considerable distances or the selective exploitation of local outcrops with significant logistical coordination. Some estimates suggest that certain monoliths at the site weigh between 2 and 5 metric tons, requiring organized labor forces and transport strategies that, while not impossible, would demand a level of planning and engineering sophistication rarely attributed to societies of this period without metal tools or wheeled vehicles. The lack of direct evidence for transport mechanisms such as preserved rollers, sledges, or road systems adds yet another layer of uncertainty to the technological narrative. Excavations conducted during the 1980s and 1990s uncovered workshop areas and partially finished sculptures, offering a rare glimpse into the production process. Yet, even these finds have done little to resolve the central mystery. The unfinished pieces show early-stage shaping through pecking and abrasion, but the transition from these rough forms to the highly polished final products remains poorly understood. Experimental archaeology has attempted to replicate similar finishes using only stone tools and sand-based abrasives, demonstrating that such results are theoretically achievable, but often requiring hundreds or even thousands of hours of continuous labor for a single piece. While this does not make the achievements of Takalik Abage impossible, it does raise questions about efficiency, standardization, and the scale of production observed at the site. Another intriguing aspect is the apparent standardization of proportions across multiple monuments. Measurements taken from several stelae and sculptural elements reveal recurring ratios in the placement of facial features and body segments, suggesting an underlying system of geometric planning. This is particularly evident in the alignment of eyes, nose, and mouth within defined spatial grids, a technique that implies not only artistic skill but also a conceptual understanding of proportion and symmetry. Comparable systems have been documented in later Maya sites such as Copan, where stelae from the classic period circa 5th to 9th centuries CE exhibit highly sophisticated iconography and mathematical precision. However, Takalik Abage predates these developments by several centuries, positioning it as a potential precursor to later Mesoamerican advancements in both art and engineering. The chronological layering of the site further deepens its significance. Radiocarbon dating and ceramic analysis indicate continuous occupation from as early as 1000 BCE through the early Classic period, with distinct phases reflecting a transition from Olmec-influenced styles to fully developed Maya cultural expressions. Yet the technological leap observed in stoneworking does not follow a simple linear progression. Instead, it appears as a series of abrupt refinements, with certain periods producing works of exceptional quality that are not consistently matched in subsequent phases. This irregular pattern challenges conventional models of gradual technological evolution and suggests the possibility of fluctuating knowledge transmission, perhaps dependent on specialized artisans, elite patronage, or even external influences. Despite decades of research, one of the most persistent and troubling gaps in our understanding remains the scarcity of tools. Archaeological surveys at Takalik Abage have recovered relatively few implements that could be definitively linked to large-scale stone carving, and those that have been found, primarily hammerstones and simple abrasives, do not fully account for the precision observed. Unlike later civilizations that left behind metal chisels, drills, or other specialized instruments, the inhabitants of Takalik Abage seem to have relied on perishable or non-distinctive tools that have either not survived or are indistinguishable from ordinary stones. This absence has led some researchers to propose that organic materials such as hardwood implements combined with abrasive slurries may have played a greater role than previously assumed, though direct evidence remains elusive. In this context, Takalik Abage stands as more than just a transitional cultural site. It becomes a focal point for one of archaeology's most enduring questions. How do we reconcile the disparity between observable results and the limited evidence of the processes that produced them? The precision of its stonework, the scale of its monuments, and the apparent sophistication of its design principles all point toward a level of technical capability that challenges simplistic assumptions about early Mesoamerican societies, whether these achievements were the result of incremental innovation, lost techniques, or a form of knowledge transmission that has yet to be fully understood. Takalik Abage continues to resist easy explanation. And perhaps that is precisely what makes it so compelling, not merely as a relic of the past, but as a reminder of how much of that past remains, even now, beyond our grasp. Rising silently from the mist-covered plains of Rakhine State, Moralu does not immediately resemble the grand, symmetrical temple complexes of Angkor or Bagan. Instead, it appears heavier, darker, almost defensive, its stone temples resembling fortresses more than sacred monuments. Yet beneath this austere exterior lies one of the most puzzling examples of ancient engineering in Southeast Asia, where architecture, hydrology, and stone craftsmanship converge in ways that continue to challenge modern understanding. Established in the 15th century and flourishing until the late 18th century, Moralu served as the capital of a powerful maritime kingdom that maintained trade links stretching from the Indian subcontinent to the Middle East. Archaeological surveys conducted throughout the 20th century, particularly those led by the Archaeological Survey of India and later by Myanmar's Department of Archaeology, reveal that the city was not randomly constructed but carefully planned, integrating defensive terrain, water management systems, and religious architecture into a unified urban design. However, among all its features, one aspect stands out as particularly difficult to explain: the extraordinary precision of its stone carving, achieved on hard materials with surprisingly little evidence of the tools used. Inside structures such as the Shitong Temple, often cited as the most complex monument in Ryukyu, researchers have documented thousands of stone reliefs carved directly into the inner walls, depicting scenes from Buddhist cosmology, royal ceremonies, and daily life. Some surveys estimate that the temple contains over 80,000 individual figures and motifs, each executed with remarkable consistency in depth, proportion, and alignment. These carvings are not merely decorative, they are integrated into the architectural structure itself, forming continuous narrative bands that wrap around corridors and chambers in a manner that requires precise spatial planning. What makes this particularly intriguing is the nature of the stone used. Much of Moralu's construction relies on sandstone and other locally sourced materials that, while workable, still demand controlled, repetitive force to shape accurately. In experimental archaeology, replicating similar levels of detail using only traditional iron chisels has proven time-consuming and prone to error, often leaving visible tool marks and irregularities. Yet, in Ryukyu, many surfaces appear unusually smooth, with minimal signs of correction or reworking, suggesting either an advanced level of craftsmanship or techniques that are not yet fully understood. Comparisons with other ancient sites only deepen the mystery. At Angkor Wat, for instance, bas-reliefs carved into sandstone walls display extraordinary artistry, but close inspection reveals clear chisel marks and layering techniques consistent with known Khmer tools and methods. Similarly, in Indian cave complexes such as Ajanta or Ellora, unfinished sections provide insight into the step-by-step carving process, exposing rough cuts beneath polished surfaces. In contrast, Ryukyu offers far fewer transitional examples. Many carvings appear to move directly from raw stone to finished detail with little visible intermediate stage, as if the artisans possessed a method for maintaining accuracy throughout the entire process without iterative correction. This absence of clear tool signatures has led some researchers to hypothesize the use of specialized chisels or abrasion techniques, possibly involving sand or other granular materials, though definitive evidence remains elusive. Excavation campaigns in the late 20th and early 21st centuries have attempted to address this question by analyzing microsurface patterns on the carvings. Studies conducted by regional universities and documented in Southeast Asian archaeological journals indicate that while microscopic striations are present, they do not always align with the expected patterns produced by standard iron tools. In some cases, the grooves are finer and more uniform than what would typically result from repeated hammer and chisel strikes, raising the possibility that finishing techniques, perhaps involving polishing compounds or rotational tools, were employed. However, no such tools have been definitively recovered from the site. This gap between the physical evidence and the observable results remains one of the central puzzles of Moralu's stonework. Adding to the complexity is the sheer density and organization of the carvings. Unlike isolated sculptures, the reliefs in Moralu form continuous visual systems that must have been planned in advance. Maintaining proportional accuracy across thousands of figures in confined corridors would require some form of measurement system, whether based on grids, templates, or standardized units. Yet, as of now, no physical templates or measuring devices have been conclusively identified in excavation layers associated with the main construction phases. This raises an important question. Were these artisans relying entirely on mental mapping and experience? Or did they employ perishable materials such as wood or cloth grids that have simply not survived in the archaeological record? The broader architectural context reinforces the impression of a highly coordinated construction effort. The temple's thick stone walls, often several meters deep, are interlaced with narrow passageways and ventilation channels that maintain stable interior conditions even in the humid tropical climate. Integrating detailed carvings into such a structurally demanding environment would have required precise sequencing. The stone blocks had to be positioned, aligned, and secured before carving could begin, or alternatively, carved in situ with exact knowledge of final placement. Either scenario implies a level of planning and execution comparable to other advanced pre-modern engineering feats. When compared to sites like Borobudur, where relief panels were assembled from pre-carved blocks, Mrauk-U appears to rely more heavily on carving directly into assembled structures, increasing the margin for error and making the observed precision even more difficult to account for. Archaeological timelines also complicate the narrative. Radiocarbon dating and stylistic analysis place the peak construction of Mrauk-U between the 15th and 17th centuries, a period when iron tools were certainly available but not necessarily capable, on their own, of producing such consistent fine detail at scale without leaving clearer traces. Furthermore, historical records from the Mrauk-U kingdom, while describing trade wealth and religious patronage, provide limited technical insight into construction methods. This absence of documentation stands in contrast to other regions where inscriptions or manuals have preserved aspects of architectural knowledge. In recent years, technological approaches such as 3D scanning and digital reconstruction have begun to shed new light on the site. High-resolution models of temple interiors reveal subtle geometric regularities in the layout of carvings, suggesting that underlying grids or proportional systems may indeed have been used. However, these findings remain interpretative rather than conclusive. Without direct evidence of the tools or techniques employed, the question of how such precision was achieved remains open. In summary, Mrauk-U stands as one of the most unique sites of ancient engineering. While it is less famous than Angkor or Bagan, it raises even more difficult questions, especially the remarkable precision of its hard stone carvings, achieved with almost no clear traces of tools. This could point to a lost technique, an underestimation of ancient craftsmanship, or simply gaps in the archaeological record. Whatever the answer, Mrauk-U shows that ancient technology did not always progress in a straight line. It may have reached remarkable heights and then disappeared in ways we still do not fully understand. What do you think allowed the craftsmen at Mrauk-U to achieve near-perfect precision on hard stone lost technology, or are we simply underestimating them? Share your thoughts in the comments below.